Chapter 2779. Fairy Hongxia was still reluctant to leave. She watched as Xiao Hua calmly kept the capital star array spiritual talisman. Only then did she turn around and release her spiritual sense, which circled around Xiao Hua. At this moment, a furious spiritual sense came crashing towards her like a tidal wave. At the same time, a sharp sword will rushed towards her like 10,000 swords, forcing Fairy Hongxia to retract her spiritual will. Xiao Hua looked coldly at the origin of the divine sense. He did not panic and flew into the sky. After identifying the direction, he flew in a different direction from Fairy Hongxia. Facing a swordsman with a sword illusion, Xiao Hua was confident no matter how many of them there were. He did not ask Fairy Hongxia and the rest to hide. However, facing a swordsman with a sword illusion, Xiao Hua did not have the slightest confidence. Especially since this swordsman was willing to disregard his status and come looking for Xiao Hua. Then the safety of Fairy Hongxia and the rest would be a problem. Therefore, Xiao Hua had to make a choice. He was alert in his heart. When he sensed a swordsman approaching, he immediately asked Fairy Hongxia and the rest to leave. He stayed behind to hold back the swordsman. Fairy Hongxia's heart was really like a ball of ice, melted by Xiao Hua's courage and care. If not for Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro by her side, she would have stuck to Xiao Hua's body and become one with him. Fairy Hongxia even wanted to stay behind and face the furious swordsman with Xiao Hua. However, she knew that her cultivation was far inferior to Xiao Hua's. She would only be a burden if she stayed behind. What she wanted to do was to grasp the opportunity of this trip to Meng Mountains and increase her cultivation base. She wanted to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Xiao Hua as soon as possible, and be able to laugh proudly together with him. Xiao Hua flew up into the sky. He didn't use the Imperial Thunder transformation. Instead, he used a simple wind evasion technique and flew towards the direction where the sunlight was rising. The orange sunlight shone on his face, his phoenix eyes were slightly opened, his eyes were filled with spirit, showing off a boundless elegance. That infuriated spirit consciousness swept over from all directions. The moment it came into contact with Xiao Hua, it came to a stop. It no longer swept towards the direction of Fairy Hongxia and the others. Evidently, Xiao Hua was the target of this sword. Seeing that the swordsman's divine sense had locked onto him and did not chase after Fairy Hongxia, Xiao Hua was relieved. But then, he was a little surprised. After all, when he, Li Zongbao, and the other two barged into the Huan Kingdom and killed those second and third grade illusory swordsmen, they left behind traces of their magical weapons. Just from these clues alone, it was impossible to separate Xiao Hua from the four of them. There was no reason for him to only chase after Xiao Hua and not look for Fairy Hongxia and the others. After all, there were three of them. Oh, I understand. Xiao Hua sneered. It must be Qi Chengyi from the Seven Spirit Mountain. Since he used the Celestial Sword Secret Manual as a cover to lure the sword cultivators of the Huan Kingdom to come and kill Yi Zichen would not be able to do anything about it. And when I was breaking the Brahma Pagoda's array, I was also breaking the array by myself. How could he not know yours truly's bottom line? Me. This young master was still kind at that time. I shouldn't have let such a scheming person off that day. But, this is good too. Xiao Hua thought to himself again. I will transform into a sword, and even attract the attention of other illusory swords. Senior brother Li and the others will be able to safely pass through the Huan state. Let's meet again after I escape from this sword transformation sword. However, when he thought of escaping from the sword, Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes slightly, and there was an impulse in his heart. Hey, I am now in the Jindan realm, and my strength should be comparable to Yuanying realm. If I only think about escaping from this inexplicable sword, wouldn't it be a waste of more than 700 Ling Li pills? Xiao Hua slightly released his divine thoughts. When it touched the divine thoughts of the sword, he immediately retracted it, and the flying speed was slightly accelerated. After flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiao Hua once again released his Buddha's consciousness. After taking a quick look, he suddenly accelerated his flying speed again. His figure actually turned in another direction. Immediately, in the next half day, Xiao Hua kept changing his direction, and the flying speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Speaking of the experience of escaping, Xiao Hua was absolutely first class. He always kept a certain distance from the sword. Finally, there was an endless ice lake in front of him. There was a thick layer of ice on the ice lake, and sometimes there was some broken ice. The blue waves rippled, and there were many huge icebergs between the ice layer and the blue wave. Xiao Hua took a deep breath, flew into the ice lake, and landed on an iceberg of hundreds of feet. He put his hands behind his back, turned around, and looked at the distant sky with an extremely calm face. The divine thoughts of the sword were locked on Xiao Hua from the beginning to the end, and through the divine thoughts, an undisguised shame and anger was transmitted. It was obvious that the sword was irritated by Xiao Hua's almost provocative escape. Although the figure of the sword had not yet appeared, the threatening sword essence was getting closer and closer. The sword origin in Xiao Hua's body was stimulated, and Dream Slayer and Mountain Splitter couldn't help but make a sword sound. Xiao Hua's body also emitted a faint sword light. The sword really can't be mentioned in the same breath with the illusory sword. Xiao Hua slightly sighed in his heart, but at the same time, he had some expectations. A light purple sword brilliance was born in the distant sky, like an extremely gorgeous meteor across the sky. The purple reflected the orange-red sunlight, giving out a sparkling brilliance. This brilliance was like a blooming camellia, and the petals swaying in the wind were the flickering sword energy. At this time, the sky was dotted with white clouds, like sheep leisurely scattered on the grassland, and it was quiet. When the sword energy of the sword appeared, it actually split the whole sky into two halves. The white clouds were smashed by the sword energy and turned into cotton wadding. What killing intent! Feeling the threatening sword essence become colder and colder, like the winter wind wrapping around him, even the power of imprisonment and the desolate killing intent became denser and denser. Not only did the surface of his body feel heavy, even the true essence and sword origin in his body gradually solidified. Xiao Hua sneered, and with a clap of his hand, the seal of the ocean appeared. Under the urging of his transcendence energy, the seal floated above Xiao Hua's head, and an earthen yellow brilliance sprinkled down, protecting Xiao Hua within. Buzz! That purple camellia flower flew several li away. That intense sword humming sound resounded through the entire frozen lake. Fine lines began to appear on the thick layer of ice. Waves began to rise on the water surface that had yet to condense. Swoosh tilde countless sword lights sprinkled down, and actually covered the sky above the ice lake. Small camellia flowers actually bloomed all over the sky. However, when the sword howl came to an abrupt end, the camellia flowers had also stopped at a height of 300 m above Xiao Hua. The camellia flowers that covered the entire sky flickered and converged towards Xiao Hua's location before descending. Strands of fierce sword energy pierced through the camellia flowers and pierced towards Xiao Hua. When they were less than 300 m away from Xiao Hua, the camellia flowers actually transformed into thousands of rays of sword energy that surged towards Xiao Hua's head like a myriad of streams returning to their source. Go. Xiao Hua sneered, and pointed his finger. The seal of the ocean that had been accumulating power immediately shone brightly, and suddenly expanded. The coiling dragon on the seal roared, and met the sword lights head-on. A violent roar resounded, and at the same time, an intense brilliance was emitted. Waves of energy were emitted from where the magic treasure and sword energy collided, and huge waves of several zhong formed above the ice lake. The thick ice that originally had some cracks had long been shattered, and pieces of ice that were several feet large and several inches small were lifted into the air, then fell into the ice water, and rippled along with the waves. Not bad. As expected of a terrifying phoenix. As expected of Nameless, who shocked Lu Ruochang. This cultivation is worthy of this sword making a move. A thin voice came from the camellia flowers in the sky. Immediately after, the sword intent of the camellia flowers gradually converged, and a beautiful woman wearing a purple sword robe appeared from the sword brilliance. Hiss. Xiao Hua originally had a smile on his face, but when he heard the woman's last sentence, he unconsciously frowned, and his gaze fell on the woman. This woman was in her 20s, but the facial features on her face were somewhat rough, and she had a kind of thick eyebrows and big eyes. Although she looked very pretty, she was far from the kind of little bird that relied on others. Perhaps it was more appropriate to call her a tomboy. Moreover, this woman's skin was also rough, and the sword brilliance that had converged into her body did not completely enter her body. There were still several strands of sword energy that were as thick as a child's arm coiled around her body like pythons, and they were even slowly swimming around. This Xiao doesn't know what you are talking about. Xiao Hua sneered. This Xiao only came to Huan country with a few senior brothers to gain experience. I don't know why, but not only were there illusory swordsmen intercepting us, there are even transforming sword seniors coming to stop us. Could it be that in this Huan country, there is no such thing as status? Any high-level swordsman can attack and kill a low-level swordsman? If a Foundation establishment cultivator attacks and kills a third-grade illusory swordsman in a great battle, this sword can relate this matter to sneak attacks, carelessness, and encirclement. The woman smiled faintly, revealing some yellow and white teeth. Those teeth were actually a bit bigger than others. However, this Foundation establishment cultivator killed second-grade and third-grade illusory swordsmen one after another. Do you think this sword will still treat this Foundation establishment cultivator as a Foundation establishment cultivator? Moreover, right now is a great battle between Dao cultivators. This cultivator actually crossed the battle line and infiltrated into the depths of my Huan country, causing a storm of blood. Do you know what he is plotting? How can this sword not come? What kind of status can this sword have to worry about? At this point, the woman looked at Xiao Hua with interest and lightly pointed with her finger. Moreover, this cultivator actually has my sword cultivation's ultimate technique, and there is even sword origin in his body. He even obtained my Huan country's divine sword secret manual. Tell me, how can this sword not be curious and come to take a look? Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He had revealed his illusory sword cultivation in Huan country, but every time he used it, it was a one-hit kill, never leaving anyone alive. Moreover, when he broke the Seven Spirit Mountains Brahma Pagoda formation, he did not use a flying sword at all. He did not know how this sword woman knew that he had sword origin in his body. -11. Chapter 2780. Senior, you're wrong. Xiao Hua said in astonishment. Junior is indeed a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect, and I'm also the so-called terrifying Phoenix. Junior doesn't intend to hide this. Furthermore, when this Junior was passing through the sword tomb, I once said this to a senior who transformed into a sword. How could Junior be a sword cultivator? Moreover, the so-called divine sword secret technique is nothing more than a false accusation by Qi Chang'e of the Seven Spirit Mountain. He wanted to borrow the hands of a group of illusory sword sect disciples to kill Junior. How could he carelessly give such an important secret technique to Junior? If he didn't give it to Junior, can't you snatch it? If Junior really did snatch it, how could he survive? Can he still return alive? Xiao Hua proudly retorted. Yes. The woman nodded vigorously. Qi Chang'e is an illusory sword sect swordsman, and there are many Seven Spirit Mountain swordsmen following him. They even have their Brahma Pagoda formation. Even that can't stop you, and from your tone, you can even kill them all. Tell me, how could this sword not come? This. Xiao Hua didn't expect that he would still leave a bad impression and let this illusory sword sect swordsman feel that something was wrong. If Senior doesn't care about your reputation as a sword transformation senior and wants to deal with Junior, then, there's nothing I can do. As long as Senior doesn't spread the news and doesn't damage Senior's reputation, then it's fine, Xiao Hua said indifferently. Ha, didn't you just say it? If you were willing, you wouldn't have let Qi Chang'e spread the news about the divine sword secret technique. The woman laughed. Why can't this sword say that? Senior is indeed qualified to say that. Xiao Hua's voice was still calm. However, does Senior have the confidence to keep Junior here? Why can't this sword keep you here? The woman coldly said, even if you have the ability to kill a third-stage illusory sword sect swordsman, can you escape from this sword's hands? Junior has no grievances with Senior. If Senior wants to bully the weak, Junior has nothing to say. The true essence around Xiao Hua's body slightly flowed, and his eyes flashed with a trace of excitement. No grievances? The woman sneered. This sword is Xuemingcha of the Void Heaven Sword School. Let's not talk about the Dao sword competition, just the fact that you killed my Void Heaven Sword School's Qin Jian is enough reason for me to kill you. I see. Hearing this woman call herself a swordsman of the Void Heaven Sword School, Xiao Hua immediately extinguished the hope in his heart. He pointed at the overturn the sea seal and created several hurricanes to suck in the surrounding spiritual energy. Haha. You're really bold. Seeing this, Xuemingcha laughed and said, in the face of this sword, you actually didn't run away, nor did you surrender. You even want to put up a desperate struggle. If you don't have a nascent soul cultivation, who would dare to have such a plan? Wang tilde at this moment, Xiao Hua didn't say anything else. He activated the seal of overturning sea and smashed it towards Xuemingcha. Xuemingcha put his index finger and middle finger together and pointed at the air. With a sheeing sound, like a sharp sword being unsheathed, a ray of sword light flew out from his fingers and hit the seal of ocean. With a crack sound, the ray of sword light was shattered into pieces. The seal of ocean only rolled slightly in the air and came down again. Not bad, not bad. Xuemingcha nodded as if he was praising Xiao Hua. He looked at the seal of ocean surging with a strong imprisoning force. It set off several gusts of wind and shrouded the space around him. When Xiao Hua was still in the late stage of the foundation establishment realm, the seal of ocean was already very powerful. Now that Xiao Hua was in the gold core realm, the spiritual energy in his body was as vast as the ice lake under his feet. The power of the seal of ocean had reached another level. The space around Xuemingcha gradually solidified from top to bottom. Not even the slightest breeze could penetrate it. In fact, when the seal of overturning the sea was about 10 feet away from Xuemingcha's head, the coiling dragon that had been coiling around the seal suddenly charged out. It roared as it charged towards Xuemingcha with the seal in its mouth at lightning speed. Its great strength and indescribable power were so great that even a mountain would be smashed into pieces by it. However, Xuemingcha, who hadn't moved all this time, revealed a mocking smile. Then, sword light shot out from her body in all directions. Every ray of sword light was a sharp flying sword. In an instant, they shattered the confinement of the seal of ocean. Moreover, Xuemingcha stretched out both hands. 10 rays of sword light flew out from the 5 fingers of both hands and attacked the seal of ocean. With a crack sound, several of the 10 rays of sword light blocked the seal of ocean. The seal of ocean rolled several times and couldn't fall down. The other rays of sword light were even more powerful. With a shua 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 sound, they actually cut the roaring coiling dragon in half. The shadows flashed in the air and turned back into the shape of a dragon and landed on the seal. The attack of a sword is indeed powerful. Seeing that Xuemingcha didn't turn into a sword and blocked the seal of ocean, Xiao Hua sighed in his heart. The thought of using the Kunlun mirror was also extinguished. However, his body suddenly moved. He flew towards the distance. Where do you think you're going? Xuemingcha naturally paid attention. Seeing that Xiao Hua wanted to escape, she hurriedly waved her hand. Several rays of sword light appeared and surrounded Xiao Hua from several directions. Xiao Hua sneered. His body suddenly disappeared. Oh! Xuemingcha frowned slightly. Her divine sense swept over like a waterfall. However, the area within 100 feet was empty. She didn't see Xiao Hua at all. Xuemingcha snorted coldly. The sword light around her body shone brightly. Her entire body gradually revealed the outline of a huge sword. Rays of flying swords flew out from the huge sword. It was as if 10,000 arrows had been shot at the same time. Catcher. A series of crisp sounds came from several feet above Xuemingcha's head. Then, 2 rays of sword light, one green and one red, flew out from the place where the crisp sounds came from. They flew towards Xuemingcha's neck from top to bottom. The sword light was extremely fast, far faster than the sword light that Xuemingcha sent out. The 2 rays of sword light even dodged the flying swords. Just as Xuemingcha's gaze swept across the sky and saw Xiao Hua's figure appear there, the green and red rays of sword light pierced between Xuemingcha's neck. Xiao Hua actually didn't escape far away. Instead, he closed in on Xuemingcha in a moment. When he used the Devil Realm concealment technique, He sent out the spirit-slaying vital light. Catcher. The green and red rays of sword light flash. However, the blood light that Xiao Hua expected didn't appear with the flash of sword light. Instead, a light purple sword light appeared on Shui Mingcha's neck, blocking the spirit-slaying vital light outside of the sword light. Not good. This spirit-slaying vital light can't kill a sword. When Xiao Hua saw that the spirit-slaying vital light couldn't do anything, his heart went cold. He hurriedly pointed at the sword gourd and was about to withdraw the spirit-slaying vital light. How dare you! Although the spirit-slaying vital light didn't hurt Shui Mingcha, it really gave Shui Mingcha a fright. In addition to being frightened, Shui Mingcha was also angry. His figure flew up, and his hands that had not yet transformed into swords suddenly stretched out. Two thick sword lights were like pillars as they pierced straight towards Xiao Hua's abdomen. At the same time, the sword light on her body flourished. A suction force was born from the sword light, and it actually sucked in the spirit-slaying vital light. Withdraw. Xiao Hua was shocked. The golden core in his body suddenly surged and rushed into the sword gourd. A layer of silver appeared on the sword gourd, and even the golden threads that never appeared before were faintly discernible. Whoosh! The suction force inside the sword gourd increased greatly under Xiao Hua's urging. Finally, the spirit-slaying vital light was absorbed into the sword gourd. Who's afraid of you? Seeing that the spirit-slaying vital light was withdrawn, Xiao Hua's heart was a little relieved. With a flick of his sleeve, the sword gourd was absorbed into the space. He roared again, and his eyes flashed with fanaticism. He raised the wishful steel staff, and his figure suddenly accelerated towards the sword light. Rumble. A loud noise sounded. Shui Mingcha's eyes showed obvious surprise. Xiao Hua's figure was not blown away by the sword pillar as she imagined. Instead, the thick sword pillar was actually defeated by the wishful steel staff. Shui Mingcha's surprise was only a flash, and then she waved her hands again. The pillar-shaped sword light disappeared, and a wave of sword light rushed towards Xiao Hua like a tide beating the shore. Come on! Xiao Hua roared, and the wishful steel staff also rolled, and like a countercurrent, it flew towards Shui Mingcha. A ray of sword light was shattered, and a piece of sword chi was scattered. Oh, you really have some skills, although the yin-yang sword gourd was refined by you just now. Shui Mingcha's gaze fell on Xiao Hua's wishful steel staff, and her thin voice now had a hint of a sword cry. But this demonic weapon is very powerful. I'm afraid that the disciples of the illusory sword sect have suffered a lot because of this demonic weapon. It's more than suffering a loss. Xiao Hua sneered. This demonic weapon of this young master is stained with the blood of many swordsmen. Now, I'm going to taste the blood of the illusory sword sect. Ha ha ha, arrogant. It's simply arrogant to the extreme. This sword has never heard of a Dao sect cultivator actually using my sword gourd to kill the illusory sword sect. Shui Mingcha's voice was sharp, and wave after wave of sword flow rushed towards Xiao Hua. The sword flow followed Shui Mingcha's voice and also showed a wave, smashing towards Xiao Hua like a mountain. This mountain and this wave were composed of sword light, and it was somewhat similar to the sword condensing the world in the Golden Destruction Array. However, these sword shapes could only flow and could not be condensed. Obviously, Shui Mingcha's sword cultivation was advancing towards the sword condensing the world. Fight. Xiao Hua was not afraid at all. He waved his arms and rose up in the sword flow. In this way, the two people confronted each other for half a cup of tea's time. Xiao Hua was unable to get close to Shui Mingcha, and Shui Mingcha was also unable to injure Xiao Hua. Seeing that this move was futile, Xiao Hua waved his hand and collected the seal of turning the sea in midair. While one hand was still waving the wishful steel staff, the other hand displayed the thunder attraction technique. Catcher. In the sky, the sound of thunder was faintly heard, and a large number of dark clouds pressed down, as expected of the terrifying phoenix. Where is your Dharma body? Shui Mingcha's eyes revealed a trace of dignity as she coldly said. Why would I need to use the phoenix Dharma body to deal with a first-grade illusory swordsman like you? Xiao Hua pulled his hand, and several thumb-sized heavenly thunder attraction technique struck the sword flow rushing towards him. -11. Chapter 2781. With a loud rumble, a large area of sword light was destroyed by the heavenly thunder. Xiao Hua took the opportunity to fly closer to Xue Mingcha. You want to fight with this sword with just this demonic weapon of yours? Xue Mingcha understood Xiao Hua's intention and unconsciously laughed. This sword will let you know the ability of a first-grade sword transformation. Buzz tilde a fierce sword cry resounded. Xue Mingcha's figure gradually disappeared, and a huge sword finally appeared in mid-air. Fight tilde the sword essence in Xiao Hua's body suddenly accelerated as Xue Mingcha transformed into a sword. Just like how the soul execution vital light was sucked away by the sword essence felt like it was coming out of his body. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He tried his best to stabilize the sword essence. He didn't use the wishful staff anymore. His hands formed seals, and the thunderbolts and heavenly thunder fell like rain. Rumble tilde the continuous sound of thunder and the rising and falling lightning struck the huge sword and the surrounding sword light. However, no matter how rampant the lightning was, no matter how the heavenly thunder struck, the sword light of the huge sword was still bright, and even had a feeling of becoming more and more glorious. Is sword transformation so powerful? Xiao Hua's mouth was somewhat bitter. At this moment, he already understood that a swordsman who had entered the sword transformation realm not only had an attack power that surpassed that of an ordinary nascent soul cultivator, even the body that had transformed into a sword also had an extremely strong defense. Not to mention that he was not a true nascent soul cultivator. Even if he was, without a sharp magic treasure and attack method, it would be difficult for him to take advantage of this huge sword. Buzz tilde along with the sword cry, the huge sword transformed by Xue Mingcha moved. The movement of sword transformation was different from the movement of an illusory sword that used a secret technique to forcibly enter sword transformation. An extremely smooth sword arc flashed, and the huge sword had already crossed the sky. Then, like an antelope hanging its horn, a strong confinement and indescribable sharpness crossed the space of more than 10 zhong and fell in front of Xiao Hua. Even a feeling of being torn apart was born from Xiao Hua's skin. Xiao Hua had already seen this kind of sword transformation attack at Chicken Crow Mountain. Although Xue Mingcha's sword transformation was no match for the old man's sword transformation, the power behind this strike was definitely not simple. Xiao Hua felt that even if there was a mountain here, this strike would be able to flatten it. However, this power and this confinement were not what made Xiao Hua feel the most uncomfortable. What made Xiao Hua feel the most was the sword essence around him. It was like a moth flying into a flame. This sword essence was in tune with this sword light, and it was trying to force its way forward. Forget it tilde Xiao Hua understood in his heart that Xue Mingcha had somehow found out that he had sword origin in his body. This sword transformation attack had already taken into account his sword origin. The sword origin that he had forcefully cultivated in the sword catacomb had now become his burden. I'm going for broke tilde. Xiao Hua clenched his teeth. Wong tilde at the same time, a sword hum was emitted from Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua no longer suppressed his sword origin. His entire body emitted an intense brilliance, and a heart-shaped great sword formed around Xiao Hua's body. As Xiao Hua forcefully transformed into a sword, the suction force of the giant sword was greatly reduced. However, Xue Mingcha's sword light was in front of him again. Xiao Hua did not dare to be negligent. He waved his entire sword light and went forward to meet it. However, just as the sword light flew out, the great sword that Xue Mingcha had transformed into suddenly crossed the space of several tens of feet and appeared within the sword light. Not good. How could Xiao Hua not know that this was definitely a sword transformation divine ability? At the same time that his figure hurriedly flew over, all the sword origin in his body surged out, and he was prepared to meet the great sword that Xue Mingcha had transformed into. Boom! An earth-shattering tremor resounded. The two soaring sword lights really did collide. Not only did the airwave sweep up the surroundings, even all the layers of ice on the ground were shattered by the airwave and the remnant sword light. Several tens of feet of real water waves were lifted up. Not only that, just as the two sword lights collided, Xue Mingcha's great sword suddenly flashed. The great sword grew by several feet, and the great sword that Xiao Hua had transformed into was completely destroyed. Xiao Hua's figure was like a huge rock that was forcefully smashed into the ice lake by Xue Mingcha. Furthermore, the remnant sword qi even went past Xiao Hua and slashed at the iceberg that Xiao Hua was previously standing on. That huge iceberg was like a piece of condensed tofu, and was split into two halves. That powerful force even pressed down the iceberg by more than 2 feet, and then it floated up from the water. As for Xiao Hua, his figure fell into the ice-cold lake water. His daoist robe had long been torn to shreds, and his body that was as hard as golden stone had many bloody scars. These bloody scars were like the mouth of a baby. Some were an inch long, and some were a foot long. All of them were filled with flesh and blood. However, although these bloody scars looked extremely serious, not a single drop of blood seeped out. The bloody light only left on the skin, and there was a faint brilliance that wrapped around it. Moreover, these wounds were also slowly shrinking and slowly recovering. However, compared to the injuries on the surface of Xiao Hua's body, it seemed that the injuries on Xiao Hua's body were even more serious. Xiao Hua's body gently floated in the icy water, as if he was a walking corpse without feeling. In fact, it was indeed similar. Right now, his mind was violently shaking, and a kind of invisible sword cry was constantly flashing in his mind. Just now, Xue Mingcha's sword strike not only hit his sword body, but also hit his sword intent and the sword heart that had yet to take shape. The damage from the sword heart directly entered his primordial spirit. Although Xiao Hua's primordial spirit was already separated and independent, his body was still affected. In particular, the sword essence that was originally flowing in his body like mercury was now on the verge of being torn apart. The connection between the sword essence was faintly discernible, and even when it flowed, it was intermittent. As if letting out a long breath, Xiao Hua's tightly closed eyes moved slightly. He was not unconscious, but the feeling of being hit by the sword was really uncomfortable. It was as if the whole world had been turned upside down. His whole body involuntarily turned over and over, but unfortunately, his body did not move. This feeling was really unbearable. Sword transformation, it's really extraordinary. This young master still underestimated sword transformation. Xiao Hua resisted the tearing pain of his body and the nauseating discomfort in his mind, and secretly thought, the reason why sword transformation is because she is a sword. How arrogant was that soul-slaying primary light, but when it touched Xue Mingcha's neck, it was actually unable to cut it. If I were to fight with her with the wishful staff, it would be considered as meeting force with force. But I'm also using my own unformed sword to fight with her. Isn't this like hitting a stone with an egg? In the future, I have to remember that using my own strength to overcome the enemy's weakness is the best strategy. Today's competitive spirit and hot-blooded desire to compete with the blue sky should be used less in the future. At this time, the eagerness in Xiao Hua's eyes had completely disappeared, and was replaced by a kind of regret. However, this regret had just flashed by, and that sharp sword intent was once again born from the surface of the lake. This guy is going to take my life today. Xiao Hua sensed the sword intent and hurriedly shook his incomparably heavy head. He urged his magic power and formed a water-repelling seal, and his figure flew away. That is, just as the magic power in his body surged, a strong confining force passed through the dozens of feet of ice water and directly enveloped him. Not to mention Xiao Hua, even within this dozens of feet range, the extremely fluctuating water ripples from before also calmed down. Although this area of water was not frozen, that kind of solidity was comparable to ice. The sword origin within Xiao Hua's body let out a mournful wail. Outside the ice lake, a sword hum resounded once again. Following that sword hum, a seemingly illusory yet seemingly corporeal sword chi swayed as it descended. Shua. Almost ignoring the dozens of feet of ice water, that sword chi directly fell on the top of Xiao Hua's head. Seeing the sword chi chopping towards him, Xiao Hua was scared out of his wits. He did not expect the sword transformation's attack to be so fierce and its speed to be so fast. Even the water-repelling seal could not avoid the confinement of this attack. Even the meridians in his body and the golden core in his lower dantian were firmly suppressed by the confining force, and not a trace of magic power could be used. Moreover, This Shuemingcha was not like those third-grade illusory swordsmen that Xiao Hua had met before. When she chopped down with her huge sword, the sword transformation's sword force was already contained within it. Xiao Hua was not a true nascent soul cultivator. Not to mention not releasing his pressure, even if he released it, how could he block this huge sword attack? Thinking about the various methods that Xiao Hua currently had, although there were many types and abnormal, if he really wanted to use them to fight against a sword transformation swordsman, it seemed that it would be difficult to use any of them. None of them could be compared to Shuemingcha's sword transformations attack. Xiao Hua, who could simultaneously kill 4 third-grade illusory swordsmen, was still somewhat delicate in front of Shuemingcha. Therefore, at this time, Xiao Hua could no longer care about hiding anything. Wang tilde the dragon transformation art within Xiao Hua's body was madly activated, and a catcher sound was heard. Within Xiao Hua's lower dantian, the 2 lightning cores within the silver-white golden core emitted violent lightning. These lightning bolts struck Xiao Hua's golden core, causing the entire golden core to rapidly revolve. A huge amount of true essence gushed out from the golden core, and even caused the extremely condensed heaven and earth spiritual chi near the golden core to rush out. Like a torrential flood in a mountain valley, it poured into Xiao Hua's meridians. As soon as this true essence entered Xiao Hua's meridians, it was transformed into magic power. The golden light around Xiao Hua's body flourished, and within this golden light, there were traces of lightning. Wu tilde a strange sound was emitted from Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua, who had already been confined by the sword transformation's power and was unable to move, was suddenly surrounded by lightning bolts. With a raise of his hand, he defeated the confining force, and his figure flashed a string of afterimages along with the lightning bolts, flying towards the surface of the water. Oh! Shuemingcha's sword was already less than 2 zhong away from Xiao Hua. Under these circumstances, even if he was an early-stage nascent soul cultivator, Shuemingcha was still confident that she could kill him. However, at this crucial moment, Xiao Hua actually used the lightning evasion technique and forcibly escaped from her sword light. How could this not shock Shuemingcha? -11. Chapter 2782. Boom tilde just as Xiao Hua flew out of the confinement, it was as if a mountain ridge had fallen into an ice lake, or as if countless fireball talismans had exploded inside the ice lake. The sword shadow flashed, and a wave of several dozen feet high was raised. A space of half a mu in size appeared inside the ice lake, and in this space, Shuemingcha's camellia-like sword quietly floated. It was as if she had always been there, and would still be there in the future. The existence of her sword pushed away all the splashes of water. So close. Xiao Hua did not have the time to comprehend the incomparable sword force of the sword transformation. After all, to push away the water of half a mu in size of the ice lake did not only rely on sword origin and sword force, but also the comprehension of the way of the sword. It was far from what Xiao Hua, who had just touched the edge of the sword transformation, could compare with. If he could stay in this sword force for a long time, it would have a crucial effect on him stepping into the sword transformation realm. Unfortunately, compared to his life, this effect was as light as a feather. Xiao Hua let out a sigh of relief in his heart. His figure strangely followed Shuemingcha's waves and airflow, rushing out of the water at an incomparably fast speed. With a series of thunderous rumbles, Xiao Hua had already rushed out more than 100 feet. "Where do you think you're going?" A sharp sword cry sounded behind Xiao Hua, and after a series of sword shadows flashed, a 5-feet-long flying sword soared into the sky. It chased after Xiao Hua like a stream of light. The speed of that sword shadow was extremely fast, and it did not seem to be inferior to Xiao Hua's Imperial Thunder transformation in the slightest. "I'm going to die." Xiao Hua saw that Shuemingcha was actually chasing after him with one in front and one behind. His Imperial Thunder transformation was actually unable to gain the slightest advantage, and he unconsciously felt his soul fly out of his body. How could he dare to think about anything else? He recklessly activated the dragon transformation art and the celestial body empowerment technique, while absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, while stimulating the true essence in his gold core, and using the lightning escape technique, he rushed forward. Just as mentioned before, when it came to escaping, Xiao Hua was really experienced. Before he had even condensed his gold core, he had already fought with Daoist Jing Yu, who was a nascent soul cultivator. However, at that time, Xiao Hua simply didn't dare to let Jing Yu get close to him. He could only keep a distance of a few dozen kilometers. But this time, when he faced Xue Mingcha, who was at the first-grade transformation sword stage, Xiao Hua was able to retreat unscathed after a head-on collision. He should be proud of himself. What was special was that after flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiao Hua did not hesitate to change direction. The strange angle and sudden change of direction threw Xue Mingcha more than 100 zhong away. When Xue Mingcha changed direction again to pursue, Xiao Hua had already flown several hundred zhong away. In the following half a day, Xiao Hua made countless turns, rushed into the sky, rushed into the ground, and even plunged into the water, all in an attempt to shake off Xue Mingcha. Unfortunately, Xue Mingcha was different from Daoist Jing Sai. She only maintained her sword form. Regardless of whether it was in the air, on the ground, or in the water, she was not affected by the environment at all. Damn it, this swordsman is indeed powerful. After tossing and turning for half a day, the shaking in Xiao Hua's mind gradually disappeared. That nauseating feeling also disappeared. Although he couldn't escape from Xue Mingcha's pursuit, Xue Mingcha didn't attack, so his life wasn't in danger for the time being. His brain began to ponder again. This young master's thunder evasion technique can already catch up to my Imperial Thunder Sect's sect master, but I still can't shake her off. What about the nascent soul cultivators of other sects? Don't even mention them. If I really encountered this guy, wouldn't I end up dead? But then again, this young master is only several hundred zhong away from this guy. If she really wanted to kill me, I'm afraid this young master still wouldn't be able to take that sword strike from before, right? While Xiao Hua was secretly astonished, Xue Mingcha's heart became even more depressed. In fact, Xiao Hua's thoughts weren't completely correct. Although the flying sword of a sword cultivator was extremely fast, far faster than cultivators of the same level, compared to the thunder evasion technique of the Imperial Thunder Sect, there was still a gap. An ordinary second-grade sword transformation stage swordsman might not necessarily be able to catch up to Xiao Hua. Because this Xue Mingcha's flying sword was somewhat special, her flying speed was also much faster than ordinary swordsmen. This was also one of the reasons why she chased after Xiao Hua from so far away. But she didn't expect Xiao Hua's thunder evasion technique to be so powerful. Even if she used all of her sword origin, she still couldn't catch up to him. Now that she thought about it, Xiao Hua landed on the ice mountain not because he couldn't escape, but because he was waiting for her. This kind of waiting was either to give the other 3 Foundation Establishment stage swordsmen a chance to escape, or it was consistent with Xiao Hua's actions. Xiao Hua wanted to kill her. Thinking that Xiao Hua wanted to kill a first-grade sword transformation stage swordsman like her, Xue Mingcha sneered in her heart. If it wasn't for the cultivation of a middle nascent soul stage swordsman, it would be impossible to break through her sword transformation stage defense. Otherwise, it would be impossible to talk about injuries, and in the short fight just now, Xue Mingcha had already ascertained Xiao Hua's strength. He was only at the early nascent soul stage, far from being her opponent. However, even if Xiao Hua wasn't Xue Mingcha's opponent, Xue Mingcha wanting to kill Xiao Hua was the same as Xiao Hua wanting to kill Xue Mingcha. It could only be an idea, but it couldn't be realized. Of course, Xiao Hua wanted to kill Xue Mingcha, but he didn't have the strength. But if Xue Mingcha wanted to kill Xiao Hua, she had the will and the strength to do so, but the timing wasn't right. Yes, Xue Mingcha was following behind Xiao Hua, and her divine sense had also locked onto Xiao Hua. However, her sword origin had been completely activated, and nearly 80% of it had been invested into the flight of the flying sword. Even if the remaining sword origin could be used to launch an attack, Xue Mingcha understood in her heart that as long as she launched an attack, her flying speed would definitely be slowed down. And in the process of slowing down, Xiao Hua would have to fly extremely far away again. Moreover, whether Xue Mingcha's attack would be effective or not, she herself wasn't sure. Didn't she see how Xiao Hua had dodged the previous head-on attack and the attack that Xue Mingcha was extremely confident in? At this time, Mingcha was relying on the fact that the sword origin in her body was far superior to Xiao Hua's. She was waiting for the true essence in Xiao Hua's body to be exhausted. Once the true essence was exhausted, the golden core wouldn't be able to provide any magic power. Xiao Hua's flying speed would slow down, and that would be the moment Xiao Hua would die. This idea was naturally a wise move for a high-level swordsman like Mingcha, and it was the same for Daoist Jing Ryu in the past. However, the early nascent soul stage Daoist Jing Ryu couldn't catch Xiao Hua decades ago. Could the current Mingcha do it? After flying like a headless fly for several days, Xiao Hua gradually had a plan in his heart. He also understood Mingcha's difficulties. As for himself, he had the heavenly infusion technique to draw in the spiritual qi of heaven and earth from the outside world, and the dragon transformation art to refine the spiritual qi. He didn't even need to activate the golden core in his dantian. Instead, he could rely on medicinal pills and spiritual herbs to support the lightning evasion technique. Moreover, this kind of crazy activation of the technique was also a kind of test for Xiao Hua's newly created technique. It was also a kind of tempering for Xiao Hua's other set of meridians that hadn't fully matured yet. Xiao Hua even thought of chasing after Mingcha like this until his golden core realm was completely stabilized before escaping. However, when he thought of Fairy Hongxia's concern, Xiao Hua decided to take a risk. He would first shake off Mingcha, then head to the place where he had agreed to meet Fairy Hongxia in advance. After flying for another half a day, another ice lake appeared in front of him. This ice lake was very similar to the ice lake from before. Moreover, there were ripples on the surface of the lake, and there were very few icebergs. Xiao Hua's heart stirred, and he suddenly plunged into the ripples. Xiao Hua had used this kind of trick many times in the past few days. When Mingcha's divine sense moved, she didn't even think about it. Her flying sword also turned around and chased down the ice lake. With a loud boom, Xiao Hua rushed into the blue water, and in an instant, the icy water rose several zhong. The waves rushed into the air, and a string of water droplets appeared. These water droplets reflected a colorful brilliance under the clear sun. However, Mingcha didn't care about this moment of beauty. Her sword flashed, and in an instant, she rushed into the blue water. However, just as she entered the water, and before the waves even fell, the divine sense that Mingcha released was suddenly blocked. The divine sense mark that locked onto Xiao Hua also disappeared. It was as if Xiao Hua had never appeared. Mingcha was greatly alarmed, and she hurriedly released her divine sense to search again. However, just as her divine sense swept out 10 zhong, she immediately felt that something was wrong, because in her divine sense, there wasn't only icy water nearby, but there were many inexplicable things, whether it was foothills, or scenery, or indescribable cultivators, or countless swordsmen, not good. When Mingcha saw this, how could she not know that she had fallen into Xiao Hua's trap? She hurriedly retracted her divine sense. However, when she retracted her divine sense, countless scenes flashed before her eyes. It was as if her divine sense had extended forward again. It wasn't retracting as she thought. Mingcha didn't dare to hesitate anymore, and hurriedly used a secret technique. However, she felt a sharp pain in her mind, and the divine sense that swept out was cut off by her. At this time, the several zhong of blue water that Xiao Hua stirred up had already fallen, but the space within several zhong of Mingcha was enveloped by a layer of innate primordial water that was as thin as a cicada's wing. Wang! Mingcha didn't reveal her physical body, and her entire sword let out a buzzing sound. Clearly, she was extremely angry. The sword light flashed, and a sword ray mixed with angry sword chi rushed into the innate primordial water. Mingcha actually wanted to destroy the innate primordial water at the risk of her sword being damaged. Boom! The innate primordial water was indeed broken by Mingcha, and when the innate primordial water landed on the sword, it quickly corroded the sword light like thorns, and in an instant, some parts of the sword light were annihilated. However, that wasn't all. In the gaps between the innate primordial water droplets, wisps of spiritual fire also appeared, and landed on the sword light. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The sound was also extremely soft, and the sword light was actually ignited by the spiritual fire. Damn it. Xue Mingcha urged her sword origin, and tried her best to resist the corrosion of the innate primordial water. Her divine sense swept out again, and she already saw that Xiao Hua had already flown several li away. -11. Chapter 2783. I must kill this bastard. Xue Mingcha was enraged at the thought of being injured in front of a cultivator. She cursed Xiao Hua in her heart. Just as she was about to activate her sword origin and soar into the sky again, she suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from her back. When she scanned her back with her divine perception, she found that a thumb-sized flame had already ignited the sword light on her back. Moreover, the fire seemed to be spreading. Is this the innate true fire? Xue Mingcha was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect Xiao Hua to have innate true fire in the innate true water. Moreover, this true fire could actually ignite her sword light. Since this true fire could ignite the sword light, then the sword origin must be able to ignite it as well. And could she not be ignited as well? The most important thing was that when the flame burned the sword light, there was a bone-eroding pain. This pain forced Xue Mingcha to escape from the sword transformation realm. This was something Xue Mingcha didn't dare to imagine. However, how could Xue Mingcha dare to escape from the sword transformation realm? She could only activate her sword origin. Her body glowed brightly, and the sword light pierced the bottom of the flame, stopping it from spreading further. However, the sword light was only stopped for a moment. The sword light was ignited by the flame again, and the fire grew even stronger. Xue Mingcha suddenly thought of the innate true water that trapped her just now. Without hesitation, she rushed over again, wanting to use the innate true water to extinguish the spirit fire. Unfortunately, when the innate true water landed on the spirit fire seemed to be nothing. It even ignited the innate true water. This isn't the innate true fire. Xue Mingcha was shocked. When she realized that this strange flame wasn't the innate true fire, she panicked even more. This was something that could ignite the innate true water. How could she let it wreak havoc on her body? Xue Mingcha gritted his teeth. The sword light around his body flashed again, and the huge sword appeared again. However, this huge sword only appeared for a brief moment before it quickly shrunk. A slender camellia flower emerged from the light of the huge sword. The camellia flower fell into the air, and gradually revealed the figure of a naked woman. When the sword light faded away, Xue Mingcha, who had changed into another set of purple sword equipment, appeared with an ashen face. Xue Mingcha didn't have time to check the situation at the scene and immediately released her divine perception. As expected, there was no trace of Xiao Hua within 100 miles. If it wasn't that Xiao Hua was flying too fast, then it was that Xiao Hua had used a concealment technique. But no matter what, with Xue Mingcha's ability, it was already no different from ascending to the heavens if he wanted to discover and catch up to Xiao Hua now. This bastard is too cunning. Xue Mingcha unwillingly used her divine sense to scan the area in front of her again and again. Only when she felt that she had really lost track of Xiao Hua did she fiercely retract her divine sense. At this moment, her divine sense was still somewhat painful. Hey! This fire! The sword light that Xue Mingcha shed should have disappeared a long time ago because it didn't have sword origin. However, under the attachment of the spiritual fire, it continued to burn for a while. At this moment, Xue Mingcha looked again. Not only did the sword light disappear, even the spiritual fire had turned into a tiny wisp. This wisp of spiritual fire could only be seen with the naked eye, and Xue Mingcha's divine sense couldn't detect it. This fire doesn't seem to be as powerful as I imagined. Xue Mingcha suddenly realized something, and her heart was somewhat ashamed and angry. This bastard Xiao Hua is really cunning. He actually set up this thing after using the innate true water. So it was to set up a maze. And this sword actually used the golden cicada shell-shedding secret technique and damaged the sword origin. But if this sword didn't use the secret technique, how could it escape from this mysterious fire? Seeing the spiritual fire slowly fall down like a thin feather, Xue Mingcha's heart moved. She clapped her hands and took out a sword-shaped container from her chest. She pointed her finger, and the small sword flew under the spiritual fire. The tip of the small sword was an entrance, and she quietly waited for the spiritual fire to enter the container. However, something strange happened. That wisp of spiritual fire didn't seem to be material at all. It actually escaped from the small sword and slowly fell into the blue waves below the small sword. What kind of fire is this? Xuemingcha was somewhat dumbfounded. She naturally knew that there were many strange things in the Dao sect, but she was still a sword. What kind of things hadn't she seen before? However, this was the first time she saw a spiritual fire that looked even stranger than the innate true fire. After using several methods to collect the spiritual fire, Xuemingcha completely gave up. She really didn't understand how Xiao Hua kept and used this item. However, when she glanced at the innate primordial water that had shrunk into a few drops in mid-air, a smile appeared on Xuemingcha's face. Fortunately, I didn't make a wasted trip this time. This sword needs innate true water to refine the sword body, and this Xiao Hua actually sent a few drop. Speaking of innate true water, the matter of the yin-yang twin springs mountain was definitely caused by this bastard Xiao Hua. Not only does this bastard have the yin-yang sword gourd, he also has innate true water. Where did he get it from? Swordmaster Chong is really too much. He left a good innate true water and didn't let this sword take it. Now it's a mess because of that bastard. At this point, Xuemingcha pointed her finger, and several sword lights flew out. They nimbly caught the few drops of innate true water and slowly sent them into the small sword-like container. Xuemingcha frowned. However, what kind of elixir is Sword Master selling in his gourd? Not only did he not chase after Xiao Hua, he even revealed this matter. It's as if the matter of the yin-yang twin springs mountain never happened. This is really troublesome. Why should this sword think about these troublesome matters? How many things are done by Sword Master's group of third-grade transformation sword masters? This sword doesn't need to go to the battlefield of the Great Sword War. The corner of Xuemingcha's mouth curled up. She waved her hand and caught the small sword-like container. After carefully putting it away, she released her divine sense again and scanned the surroundings several times. Only then did her body release sword lights and soar into the sky in a certain direction, quickly disappearing. After several days, Xiao Hua's figure strangely appeared in a place dozens of li away. This position was not only the direction Xiao Hua had fled in, but the place was also very obvious. It was an ice mountain in the middle of an ice lake. In fact, after Xiao Hua released the innate primordial water and spiritual fire, his Buddhist consciousness had been left in the ice lake. Seeing that Xuemingcha had fallen into the innate primordial water, he immediately urged the true origin in his gold core to increase his speed. When Xuemingcha's divine sense swept over again, he had already crossed the ice mountain. When Xuemingcha discovered the spiritual fire, she didn't have time to follow Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua immediately withdrew his Buddhist consciousness and quickly flew back, hiding in the ice mountain. Xiao Hua's concealment technique, the capital star array, and the maze he had set up, allowed Xuemingcha to release her divine sense between dozens of li and hundreds of li. She simply didn't sweep this ice mountain. Alas, what a pity for those few drops of innate primordial water. Xiao Hua flew above the ice lake and collected the spiritual fire that had fallen into it. He whispered with some regret, however, this young master's cultivation is still a bit lacking. I originally thought that with gold core, I would be able to fight Reverend Jing Sai. Looking at it now, it's better to be careful. If I can avoid that guy, it's better not to. If I really see him, it's better to run away as soon as possible. Following which, Xiao Hua raised his head to look at the position of the sun. After identifying the direction slightly, he flew towards another direction. The astronomical phenomenon in the extreme north of Huan country was rather strange. In the beginning, the alternation of the sun and moon was normal. However, as one went deeper, the day and night gradually lengthened. In the end, the night and day would often not alternate for dozens of days. Now, it was daytime. After Xiao Hua parted ways with Fairy Hongxia and the rest, the pale white sun had been hanging in the east without any movement. Xiao Hua was originally a directionally challenged person. At this moment, it was already not easy for him to identify the direction by looking at the position of the sun. However, Xiao Hua was still wrong. Although the sun had been hanging in the east and didn't seem to have moved, how could it not have moved for dozens of days? If it was a sword cultivator, they would definitely calculate and see which direction the sun was in. Then, they would fly towards the place they wanted to go. Furthermore, the other party would have other methods to determine the direction better. They would definitely not use the direction of the sun from dozens of days ago as the direction of today. Therefore, Xiao Hua's flight was naturally different from the direction Fairy Hongxia and the rest were heading toward. Xiao Hua flew for several days and didn't see any trace of Fairy Hongxia and the rest. However, he wasn't in a hurry. After all, he was fighting with Xue Mingcha and flew extremely far away. Fairy Hongxia and the rest shouldn't be flying too close. However, after flying for dozens of days, seeing that the sun in the east was gradually setting, Xiao Hua muttered in his heart, "Could it be? I was wrong again. Even if the three of them were rushing non-stop, with eyes escape technique, I should have found them long ago." Xiao Hua originally wanted to find a swordsman to ask about the location Fairy Hongxia mentioned before they left. However, in these dozens of days, he actually didn't meet a single person. "I've really seen a ghost," Xiao Hua thought helplessly. Previously, I didn't want to meet any sword cultivators. However, there were dozens of them. They were dozens of illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen who didn't care about their lives and sent themselves to death. They even sent an old woman who was a grade 1 swordsman. They almost took this young master's life. Now, there's no need for any illusory sword cultivators. Can't any of them come out? Xiao Hua helplessly flew in midair and released his spiritual will and Buddhist awareness, hoping to find one or two figures so that he could find traces of Fairy Hongxia and the rest. Back then, when Fairy Hongxia and the rest were forced to part ways with Xiao Hua, they fled into the distance. Especially when Fairy Hongxia's spiritual will was near Xiao Hua and was forced back by Xue Mingcha's spiritual will. Although she didn't suffer any injuries, that sharp sword-like spiritual will left a deep impression on Fairy Hongxia. -11. Chapter 2784. Furthermore, after Fairy Hongxia and the rest had flown more than 10 li away, Xue Mingcha's spiritual sense still chased after them. That spiritual sense scanned the three of them coldly, and even scanned Li Zongbao many times. However, after Xiao Hua flew far away, Xue Mingcha did not dare to stay for long, and only then did he retract his spiritual sense. Seeing this, Li Zongbao understood that Xue Mingcha's intentions were different from those illusory swordsmen. He was not here to snatch the divine sword secret manual, but to find trouble with them. Li Zongbao thought of this, so did Fairy Hongxia and Xiao Mao. Fairy Hongxia was even more worried about Xiao Hua. Although she knew that he already had the strength of an early nascent soul stage, but he was facing an illusory sword after all. Unknowingly, Fairy Hongxia's flying speed slowed down. Seeing this, Xiao Mao looked at Li Zongbao, whose face was as cold as ice, and could only fly to Fairy Hongxia and whisper, "Senior sister. Big brother's cultivation." "I don't know, but how could senior sister not know? He could easily kill 4 illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen. If he really met an illusory sword, he might not be at a disadvantage." Fairy Hongxia knew that Xiao Mao's words were reasonable, but she was still worried. She sighed and did not say anything, and turned back to look in the direction that Xiao Hua disappeared. Xiao Mao wanted to say something, but seeing Fairy Hongxia's absent-minded look, he did not know how to comfort her. "Junior sister," Li Zongbao's voice entered their ears, "even if you look back 1,000,000 times, you still can't see Xiao Hua. Even if you think about it 1,000,000 times, you still can't help Xiao Hua. What you need to do now is to raise your cultivation. Only when you are pregnant and become a grandmaster, can you be Xiao Hua's assistant. Only then can you be qualified to worry about Xiao Hua." Saying this, Li Zongbao clapped his hands and took out his beloved immortal slaughtering whip. He said in a calm and even somewhat jealous voice, "Look at this spiritual weapon, immortal slaughtering whip. Although I have never seen a spiritual weapon before, I can clearly feel that this item is mine, and mine is this item. This feeling is many times stronger than the immortal piercing whip. If this item is not a spiritual weapon, then what kind of treasure is it?" Xiao Hua who can even refine such a spiritual weapon. If you don't raise your cultivation, how can you stand shoulder to shoulder with him? Don't you see that Imperial Thunder sect disciple called Shui? Although she has something to do with Xiao Hua, she has only been cultivating in seclusion. Even when Xiao Hua went to Sky Patrol City to fight, she didn't come out to send him off. Do you think she doesn't want to? She did that for the sake of the future, for the sake of being together with Xiao Hua better. Junior sister's current cultivation can't even be compared to me. Even if you can fly to Xiao Hua's side, what can you help her with? The reason why you came all the way to Meng Mountains is to look for an opportunity. Xiao Hua lured away the transformation sword. Didn't he also want you to fulfill your wish? Now that you've lost your soul and are worried about Xiao Hua, what should you do? If you were Shui of the converted Thunder Palace, I'm afraid you would have already accompanied Xiao Hualai in his Dao sword battle, right? Not only are you unable to cultivate in seclusion by yourself, you're even being protected by Xiao Hua. Moreover, there's an even greater possibility that you'll perish in the great battle between Dao cultivators. How could you still have the carefree life of Xiao Hua? Sometimes, when you lose something, you know how precious it is, Li Zongbao sighed. His words were obviously meant to provoke her, and Fairy Hongxia understood it when she heard it. However, when Shui was mentioned, Fairy Hongxia's competitive spirit was uncontrollably born. She cupped her fists and said, "Thank you, senior brother. I understand now. I'll definitely keep senior brother's words in my heart. Actually, with Xiao Hua's cultivation base, he'll definitely be the brightest star in the great battle between Dao cultivators. However, he's been hiding it all this time. He must have his own secrets and difficulties. Therefore, in the future, in my opinion, the two of you will spend less time together and more time apart. If the two of you are of the same mind, then you should have the mentality of seeing the world as close as a stone's throw away. Junior sister's mentality right now is not good." "Yes, junior sister understands." Fairy Hongxia nodded again. "Moreover, Xiao Hua. In my opinion, his other divine abilities might not be able to catch the eyes of sword transformation. However, his ability to escape is definitely at the level of a mid-late nascent soul cultivator. Sword transformation may not be able to catch up with him. You don't have to worry today, and you don't have to worry in the future as well. We just have to hurry to mount millions of Meng Mountains. I'm sure it won't be long before he catches up with us." "Yes, junior sister understands." After hearing Li Zongbao's words, Fairy Hongxia was still a little worried. However, she also understood that Li Zongbao's words were true. She was simply worried about Xiao Hua, and that was the inferior choice. Only by increasing her own cultivation base and not worrying Xiao Hua, and being able to help him, that would be the superior choice. It's better to forget each other in the pugilistic world than to help each other in times of need. I'm afraid this is what it means. Fairy Hongxia suddenly thought to herself. Seeing Fairy Hongxia's thoughtful expression, Li Zongbao did not say much. This kind of thing would have to depend on Fairy Hongxia's own understanding. The only thing he could do was to remind her. After flying for another 10 days, Xiao Hua still did not appear. As a result, Fairy Hongxia was not the only one feeling uneasy. Even Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro were surprised. Unfortunately, before they could stop and wait, a third-grade illusory sword divine sense swept over from the front. As soon as it discovered them, it immediately locked onto them. Without Xiao Maro, the highest cultivation base among the three was only at the late foundation establishment stage. Moreover, Li Zongbao's immortal slaying whip was still being nourished and could not be used. The three of them were no match for any illusory swordsman, let alone a third-grade illusory swordsman. Sensing this divine sense, Li Zongbao's expression suddenly changed. He hurriedly pointed behind and said, "Quick, we don't have to go forward anymore. Let's turn back quickly. If we can meet Xiao Hua, it's fine. If not." Without waiting for Li Zongbao to finish his words, Xiao Mao immediately turned the flowing cloud airship around, activated all the spiritual power in his body, and flew in the direction where the three of them came from. Li Zongbao was right, but he forgot that Xiao Hua was the best at getting lost. Even if they flew to the place where the four of them separated, how could they find Xiao Hua again? Moreover, would the third-grade illusory swordsman give them a chance to meet up with Xiao Hua? The flowing cloud airship had only flown for half a day when Li Zhongbao's divine sense discovered the dark-faced sword cultivator chasing after the airship. Not only that, when Li Zhongbao sensed that the swordsman was approaching him, another 5 strands of divine thoughts swept over from the direction where the swordsman came from. After discovering the airboat, the 5 strands of divine thoughts disappeared again. When the divine thoughts swept over the airboat again, Li Zhongbao found that the 6 swordsmen of Grade 3 illusory sword had surrounded the airboat and were closing in on it in a fan-shaped formation. Maybe, we really can't fly back. Li Zhongbao retracted his divine sense, and his face was extremely ugly. He pointed at the 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen and said, "These 6 illusory swordsmen are obviously afraid of junior brother Xiao. They also saw our intention to fly back, and now they have surrounded us, blocking our way from the side. The 3 swordsmen who are flying side by side with the airship are obviously flying very fast. They are chasing after the airship and outflanking us from the side. It seems that they are trying to stop us from flying back." Xiao Mao's divine sense was far superior to that of ordinary cultivators. At this time, he also realized that something was wrong, and his face was also pale. Fairy Hong Xia knew that her divine sense was not as good as Li Zhongbao's, so she did not release her divine sense. Instead, she said calmly, "Since we can't fly back, then, we can only fly in the direction away from them, as long as we can keep a distance from them. Let's go." Li Zhongbao's body flashed brilliantly, and he poured his magic power into the flowing cloud airship. The flowing cloud airship accelerated again, and flew in another direction. Although Li Zhongbao and the others tried their best, and the airship kept changing its direction, the 3 of them were, after all, just cultivators of the foundation establishment stage. Under the pursuit of 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen, they were still unable to catch up. In just a few days, the 6 swordsmen's figures were already in sight. In fact, according to the speed of the 6 swordsmen, they could have caught up with the airship 2 or 3 days ago. But for some reason, perhaps they thought that the 3 of them were like turtles in a jar, so they slowed down their speed. Seeing that the 6 swordsmen were only 2 or 3 miles away, Li Zhongbao sighed softly in his heart. The 3 of them were really insignificant without Xiao Hua. He looked up at the direction where Xiao Hua should have come from, clapped his hands, and took out the immortal slaying whip. He whispered, "Junior sister, let's meet the enemy." "Oh, okay." Fairy Hong Xia hesitated for a moment, and then withdrew her hand from the control of the airship. She said, "Senior brother, it's better not to use the immortal slaying whip now." "Why?" Li Zhongbao frowned slightly. "This item. Although it's a spiritual weapon, it's currently being cultivated, so it can't be used as a spiritual weapon. Moreover, if senior brother rashly uses it, the illusory swordsman might notice that something is wrong, and covet it. Even if they won't really kill us now, and maybe take us as hostages, with this item, we might not be able to keep our lives." Li Zhongbao nodded slightly. He didn't have any suitable magic weapons, so the first thing he thought of was the immortal slaying whip. Hearing Fairy Hong Xia's words, he knew that she was right. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and kept the immortal slaying whip, and took out the yin-yang ring. He turned to Xiao Maro and said, "Junior brother Xiao, you guard this airship. There's no need to fight. We won't leave this airship either. Our main goal is to escape." "Yes, junior brother understands." Xiao Maro had originally stood up, but now he could only sit down. "Kaka. There are only 3 little kids here. Where's the horrifying phoenix?" A fierce voice came from the horizon. It was the Grade 3 illusory swordsman who had first discovered the airship. Following that, a voice that was neither loud nor soft said coldly, "Left sword. Who cares where the horrifying phoenix went? Capture these 3 kids. Aren't you afraid that the horrifying phoenix won't show up?" -11. Chapter 2785. Li Zhongbao looked around and saw that the voice belonged to the only female swordsman among the 6 swordsmen. She was also the fastest and was less than a mile away from the flying boat. Huang Ping, we've already searched the surroundings several hundred miles, but we didn't find any trace of the terrifying phoenix. Furthermore, these three brats are actually behind us on the flying boat. Could it be that we have already caught up to it? That terrifying phoenix escaped somewhere else? Why are you asking me? Huang Ping said calmly. Let's capture these three and interrogate them carefully. Leave the interrogation to this old man. Another valiant sword cultivator approached and sneered. My high wind sword sect has a grudge with this Dao sect cultivator. The reason why I interrogated the three Dao cultivator disciples who fought in the battle was to vent the anger of the fallen disciples of the sword region. Wang Zhengqiang, your methods are too ruthless. Let me do it. On the other side, a scholarly-looking swordsman said eerily, this chick won't be able to withstand your vicious attacks. It would be a pity if she were to fall. Fairy Hongxia's expression changed when she heard that, even though she knew that they were just trying to scare her. Attack. Li Zongbao had been holding back for a long time. When he saw the four swordsmen approaching while the other two were still some distance away, he shouted and threw out the yin-yang hoop. The yin-yang hoop was a Dharma treasure used by Heng Zhao in his early years, so it was quite powerful. As the yin-yang hoop flew out, two rays of red and green light flew out from the hoop, transforming into two rings that shot towards Zuojian, who was closest to the flying boat. He, I haven't made a move all this time because I feel like I'm bullying the younger generation. But now, you dare to provoke me first. Then I won't hold back. As Zuojian laughed, he waved his hand and a silver-white sword light shot out from his left hand. The moment the sword light entered the air, it immediately turned into specks of stars. Each speck was a dazzling sword light, and these specks of stars descended on the green and red rings. Clap, 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 clap tilde like cold water falling into a hot pot. Every bit of sword light that fell on the ring emitted a strong brilliance and sword chi. That huge impact force shattered the ring. When the green and red rings disappeared, the remaining starry sword essence suddenly gathered together with the sword technique of the left sword, turning into a full moon that rushed straight toward the yin and yang ring in midair. Oh no! The genuine essence around Li Zongbao trembled violently, apparently affected by the backlash of the yin-yang hoop. As he cried out involuntarily, he hurriedly activated the yin-yang hoop. With a loud boom, the moon-like sword essence hit the center of the yin-yang hoop. The yin-yang hoop flashed with a strong green-red brilliance to resist, but the green-red brilliance was too inferior to the full moon sword essence and almost collapsed upon contact. The brilliance of the yin-yang hoop faded, and it was sent flying into the air by the fierce sword chi. The sharp sword essence once again transformed into a meteor and shot towards the flying boat. The gap between the late Foundation establishment stage and the third-grade illusory sword was so huge. Fairy Hongxia was helpless. She raised her shoulders and an ice phoenix celestial body flew out. A phoenix cry resounded in the air. Hehe, this is a female phoenix. When Zuojian saw Fairy Hongxia's ice phoenix celestial body, his eyes narrowed into slits. If we capture her, we won't have to worry about the terrifying phoenix handing over the divine sword secret manual obediently. The ice phoenix spread its wings, and a hurricane blew out from between its wings. The wind blades that could blow boulders into the air were a joke in the eyes of the third-grade illusory swordsman. Sword radiance of different colors flashed around them, and they easily blocked the wind blade. Even the sword essence that flew close to them was not affected by the wind blades. The ice phoenix celestial body opened its mouth, and a thin layer of primordial water was spat out, blocking the sword essence. Tut 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 tilde with a muffled sound, the sword essence rushed into the thin layer of primordial water, and disappeared after a slight ripple. Primordial water? As soon as Zuojian's divine will came into contact with the primordial water, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He quickly retracted his divine will and was overjoyed. Fellow swordsman, I was the first to discover this primordial water. I have the right to claim it first. As he spoke, Zuojian pointed his finger again, and a sword essence that looked like fireworks flew out again, turning into a nebula and rushing towards the primordial water. Everyone who saw it has a share. Wang Zhengqiang and the others had covetous looks in their eyes. One of them had a sword essence that looked like a mountain, while the other had a sword essence that looked like a mountain flower. Both of them flew out first, and attacked the Ice Phoenix celestial body. Fairy Hong Xia's Ice Phoenix celestial body was huge, and it covered the space around her for hundreds of feet. However, her celestial body was not like Xiao Hua's Phoenix celestial body. It had the ability to control lightning, and could attack freely. It could only provide some benefits to Fairy Hong Xia in terms of controlling her skill. If she released it, it would naturally be a target for the others. She was also indebted to the two third-grade illusory swordsmen for thinking highly of her and attacking her together. Rumble. Two loud sounds rang out, and the Ice Phoenix celestial body flashed violently under the attack of the two sword essences. Although Fairy Hong Xia controlled her celestial body to dodge, and the two illusory swords did not attack too deliberately, she could not help but cry out in pain. More than half of her Ice Phoenix celestial body was torn apart by the sword essence. And this was very different from the injuries she suffered in the Battle of the Sword Tomb. In the illusory sword's sword essence, each sword essence was an individual flying sword. Fairy Hong Xia's Ice Phoenix celestial body was hit by thousands of flying swords, and every detail of her celestial body was destroyed. It was not something that could be recovered with simple recuperation. Fairy Hong Xia could not hold on any longer. She fell onto the flying boat, and the Ice Phoenix celestial body was absorbed back into her body. Fortunately, although the Ice Phoenix celestial body was absorbed, the primordial water was still outside the flying boat. Of course, the primordial water was not in a good state. The sword essence from Zhujian had rushed into the primordial water, and it was riddled with holes. It seemed like the primordial water would be destroyed with just a few more sword essences. Sigh, if my dear Xiao was here, the primordial water would not be in such a sorry state. Fairy Hong Xia tried her best to control the primordial water, and thought to herself, although the primordial water is powerful, my cultivation is too weak, and I can't unleash the full power of the primordial water. Forget it. Success or failure depends on this battle. With that thought, Fairy Hong Xia clenched her teeth, and a stream of water flew out. It was the primordial water from the tidal bead. This primordial water merged with the primordial water from before, and covered the entire flying boat. Ha ha ha, so there is so much primordial water. This old man and the rest will not be left empty-handed. At this moment, the other two illusory swords had also flown close. Seeing that Fairy Hong Xia had taken out so much primordial water, they laughed. Since they knew that each of them would get a share of the primordial water, Zhujian and the rest naturally weakened their attacks. But at this moment, a loud roar came from the flying boat, from the primordial water. Shameless scoundrels. 6 illusory swords besieging 3 foundation establishment stage cultivators. Even if you want the primordial water, you have to ask for my immortal slaying whip. Then, from the gap of the primordial water, a row of yellow whip shadows flew out. This row of whip shadows formed 6, and each of them smashed towards the 6 illusory swordsmen. Ha, isn't this Li Zongbao, who was extremely famous in the Taoist sword war? How can the immortal piercing whip of the Utopia faction be a match for me? Wang Zhengqiang was a swordsman from the Lingfeng sword sect. Naturally, he knew the situation of the Taoist sword war very well. Seeing the whip shadows approaching him, he laughed and pointed his finger casually. A sword light turned into a mountain peak, blocking the whip shadows. Unexpectedly, the moment the whip shadow came into contact with the mountain peak sword intent, the whip shadow suddenly twisted like a spirit snake and penetrated the gap between the mountain peak sword intent. It suddenly penetrated the sword intent and struck directly in front of Wang Zhengqiang's eyes. Out. Every day, Wang Zhengqiang saw the sound of magic weapons colliding with the sword will. When he saw the whip shadows forcibly bypassing the sword will, he was even more surprised. However, at the same time, he shrugged his shoulders casually. The sword light on his body turned into dozens of sword lights, blocking the whip shadows. This time, Wang Zhengqiang was naturally careful. He didn't dare to be careless. The whip shadow actually lingered in front of the sword light for a moment, as if it was pondering. Although the yellow light on the whip shadow shone brightly, it suddenly struck towards a certain part of the sword light. Oh, no. Wang Zhengqiang did not care about it at first. However, when the whip shadows fell on the sword lights, an unstoppable force was generated, and the sword lights collapsed. Wang Zhengqiang turned pale with fright, not only because of the power of the whip shadows, but also because the place where the whip shadows hit was a flaw in the sword light. When the whip shadows hit that spot, the sword lights were all destroyed. Boom! The sword lights around Wang Zhengqiang shone brightly. His figure flashed, but the whip shadows still hit him before they dissipated. Although the whip shadows did not have much power on him, but Wang Zhengqiang's face turned red. Not to mention that Li Zongbao was fighting against 6 people. Even if he was fighting against Wang Zhengqiang alone, it would be a fierce slap to Wang Zhengqiang's face if the whip hit here. Wang Zhengqiang was a 3rd-grade illusory swordsman whose cultivation was higher than Li Zongbao's master. There's something wrong with the immortal piercing whip. Instantly, Wang Zhengqiang understood that Li Zongbao's cultivation could not have increased so much in such a short time. Looking at Zhuo Jian and the others, the 5 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen were all hit by the whip, and they all looked extremely embarrassed. At the same time, there was a trace of fanaticism in their eyes. However, the whole scene was somewhat stagnant. Even when Xiao Mao urged the flowing cloud airship, which was wrapped in innate primordial water, to escape through the gap between the 6 people, the 6 people did not stop him. It was as if they did not see him at all. Chase. Zhuo Jian's idea was not inferior to Wang Zhengqiang's. He saw that everyone was a little afraid of each other. Some of the previous agreements had changed because of the appearance of the innate primordial water and the immortal piercing whip. Moreover, for some reason, no one wanted to be the first to face Li Zongbao. He could only wave his hand and fly up first, chasing after the flowing cloud airship at a speed that was not too fast. -11. Chapter 2786. Yes, Li Zongbao was able to hit each of the 6 illusory swords. If he really used the immortal piercing whip on one of the illusory swords, then, what would happen? If there was only one illusory sword, it would be fine. But now, there were 6 of them. Who could guarantee that the others would not spread the news? If that happened, the one who was hit by the immortal piercing whip would lose a lot of face. Although the illusory swordsmen were criticizing the Taoist sect cultivators for being sanctimonious, when it came to their face, they had to be mindful of it. After all, they were illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen. Seeing Zhuo Jian flying away, Wang Zhengqiang and the rest looked at each other and did not dare to delay. Like before, they fanned out and chased after him. While they were chasing, they were also communicating with each other, as if they were discussing something. Unfortunately, after chasing for half a day, the 6 of them did not increase their speed. Even though the flowing cloud airship did not hide like Xiao Hua, they still maintained a certain distance from the airship. After all, the immortal piercing whip was not comparable to the innate primordial water or the divine sword mystic technique. There was only one of it. Whoever made the first move would get it. But who would make the first move? This was a bigger problem than the immortal piercing whip. Furthermore, the flowing cloud flying ship could not escape from their grasp. Even if they chased after Xiao Hua like this, they could still fish him out. They could only focus on maintaining the current situation. The flowing cloud airship was covered by the innate primordial water, so the 6 illusory swordsmen could not see the situation on the airship. Among the 3 of them, besides Xiao Mao, Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia were both injured. Not to mention Fairy Hongxia, her phoenix celestial body was destroyed by the 2 illusory swords and her bloodline was severely damaged. Not to mention using her dharmic powers to cast spells, it was not easy for her to even sit cross-legged on the airship. Looking at Li Zongbao, he was also sitting there listlessly. His face was pale and his dharmic powers were exhausted. Senior brother. Fairy Hongxia tried her best to activate her dharmic body and maintain the innate primordial water to defend against the attacks of the illusory swords. She said weakly, "Your immortal slaying whip is not complete yet. Why do you have to use it? If I don't use it today, when will I?" Li Zongbao replied indifferently. "Do you want me to fall before you use it?" Then, he looked at the immortal slaying whip in his hand and smirked, But this thing is really impressive. With my magic power, I can only use it once. If these illusory swords knew about this, I wonder what they would think. It's a spiritual weapon after all. How can an ordinary magic treasure compare to the amount of magic power it requires? Xiao Maro also sighed and said, moreover, senior brother Li is forcefully activating an incomplete spirit artifact. I'm afraid that it will cause some damage to this spirit artifact, right? Li Zhongbao's mind was connected to the spiritual artifact, so he could naturally sense the wild and violent nature of the spiritual artifact that had not been completely nurtured. However, he glanced at Xiao Mao and did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, where are those illusory swords? Why haven't they attacked after such a long time? They are only following outside the flying ship. They did not attack. They did not even close the distance. Fairy Hong Xia said in a low voice. A bunch of greedy old farts. Li Zhongbao understood immediately. He snorted and said, they must be thinking of a way to take away my immortal slaying whip. Fairy Hong Xia was stunned for a moment. Then, she understood and smiled bitterly in her heart. She did not expect that Li Zhongbao's rash use of the immortal slaying whip would cause the 6 illusory swords to be suspicious of each other, resulting in a stalemate. It saved the 3 of them from dying on the spot. This stalemate will not last long, Fairy Hong Xia said in a low voice. Let's hold on for as long as we can. Li Zhongbao said calmly, as for our countermeasure, I'm afraid we can only rely on Xiao Mao to activate the flying ship. Sigh, that's true. Fairy Hong Xia had already predicted this trip to Mount Million Meng. However, she did not expect that they would end up like this before they could even reach the border of Mount Million Meng. Therefore, she also understood why no one from the CAI family of Qingyang had been able to go to Mount Million Meng and find the ancestral shrine of the CAI family. Unknowingly, a few days had passed. Xiao Mao, who had been controlling the flying ship, could not hold on any longer. On the other hand, Fairy Hong Xia and Li Zhongbao's injuries had recovered somewhat. This was because with the protection of the innate primordial water, Fairy Hong Xia's empty fort strategy had not changed. Zhuo Jian and the rest had seen through it. However, Zhuo Jian and the rest were patient. The 6 of them discussed for a while and had come to a temporary conclusion. Xiong Mufeng of the Drifting Cloud Sword Manor activated his sword radiance and caught up with the flying ship. With a wave of his hand, a cloud-like sword will rushed out and entered the innate primordial water. With a loud bang, a series of ripples appeared on the innate primordial water that was flowing peacefully. Then, a crack appeared on the primordial water, and a yellow shadow of a whip flew out. Xiong Mufeng's face lit up with joy. The sword radiance around him shone brightly. Thousands of small swords shimmering in white light surrounded him like wisps of smoke. With a muffled sound, the shadow of the immortal slaying whip landed on the sword shadow. It was very faint and did not make any special sound. Oh! Xiong Mufeng was a little stunned. He thought to himself, could it be, just as Zhuo Jian said, that the Dharma power consumed by this magic treasure is not something that a foundation-building cultivator can support? Is Li Zhongbao only strong on the outside but weak on the inside? However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, there was a loud roar that sounded like the roar of a dragon or a tiger. The shadow of the whip that landed on the sword radiance suddenly seemed to have come to life. The shadow of the whip suddenly expanded and even twisted like a yellow python and plunged into the shadow of the sword. The head of the shadow of the whip directly hit Xiong Mufeng's sword armor. The tail of the shadow of the whip even smashed the shadow of the sword into pieces. Oh no! When Xiong Mufeng saw that the shadow of the whip was close to him, he did not dare to hesitate anymore. The sword origin in his body quickly flowed out. His entire body gradually became transparent, and a giant sword appeared. Boom! As soon as the giant sword appeared, the shadow of the immortal slaying whip hit the giant sword. The sword radiance on the giant sword flickered slightly, and the shadow of the whip was smashed into pieces and fell into the air. Buzz! The giant sword made a slight sound, and Xiong Mufeng slowly returned to his human form. However, there was a hint of seriousness on his face. He was not as happy as he was when he blocked the immortal slaying whip. Fellow swordsman Xiong, how is it? The power of this immortal slaying whip. Zhuo Jian flew over from behind and asked loudly. That's right. It is indeed a supreme-grade magic treasure. Xiong Mufeng nodded and said, it even has the meaning of a legendary spiritual artifact. The shadow of the immortal slaying whip can actually identify the flaws in my sword will. If this magic treasure does not have a spirit, then Li Zongbao would be able to see through it. This Li Zongbao is also quite a character, Zhuo Jian said calmly as he raised his head and looked at the flying ship that was escaping in a panic. That's right. After all, the three of them were heroes in the Great War of Dao and Sword. If they did not have some tricks up their sleeves, how would they dare to come to my sword realm to train? Wang Zhengqiang said coldly. Moreover, that terrifying phoenix, which is even more powerful, actually colluded with the three of them to attack my sword realm illusory sword. If we don't kill them here, where will our dignity go? But it's been so many days, and that terrifying phoenix still hasn't shown up. Pu Chengfeng of the Flat Mountain Sword School also said somewhat anxiously, junior brother Sikong Yu of my humble sect died at his hands. If I don't kill Xiao Hua, I'm afraid I won't have the face to return to the mountains and become a senior of the Flat Mountain Sword School. Since things have come to this, there's no need for us to say anything more. Ju Ju of the Thousand Leaves Sword sect gritted his teeth and said, let's just kill him. As for who will take the immortal slaying whip, it won't be too late to decide after Li Zongbao dies. Looks like that's the only way. Zhuo Jian smiled bitterly. The six of them had discussed this matter many times, but no one was satisfied with the result. If other sword friends come, it'll be even harder to deal with them. We'll do as you say, sword friend Zhuo. Huang Ping of the Lunar Sun Sword sect raised her eyes and looked at the towering and dangerous peak several dozen li away from the flying boat. She said, this sword will head to the sword peak and intercept the flying boat from the front. Let's settle this matter there. Good, we'll do as you say, sword friend Huang. Zhuo Jian looked at everyone. Wang Zhengqiang and the others nodded, so he clapped his hands and said, as for who the immortal slaying whip belongs to, we can discuss it after these three die. Since everyone had come to an agreement, they all stepped on their flying swords and flew towards the flowing cloud flying ship, not showing any mercy. It seemed like they wanted to kill the three of them here, not to mention that Fairy Hong Xia had already fallen into a dangerous situation and was about to be killed by 6 grade 3 illusory swordsmen on the sword Arrowhead Peak. The lost Xiao Hua was like a headless fly, flying in all directions, trying to find a sword cultivator to ask for directions. However, after flying for a long time, Xiao Hua did not notice that the scenery around him had already changed. The ice field that was everywhere had gradually become less and more ripples appeared. The icebergs above the ripples had also become much smaller. Although there was no green vegetation, grey nameless thorns appeared in his field of vision. Although there were not many of these thorns, they still changed the pure white color of the ice field. Damn it, can someone come out? Xiao Hua scratched his ears and cheeks, constantly releasing his divine sense to search. At the same time, he thought anxiously, hasn't my luck always been excellent? Today. But just as this thought appeared in his mind, he was dumbfounded. He could not help but be dumbfounded. About 100 kilometers in front of him, he scanned with his divine sense and saw a swordsman. However, it was not just one swordsman, but many. So many that when Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense, he could not see how many there were. Are these sword cultivators here to kill me? This was the first thought that came to Xiao Hua's mind. However, when Xiao Hua switched to using his Buddhist sense and secretly peeked, he found that these swordsmen had their backs facing him. Moreover, there was a faint fluctuation of sword light in front of the swordsmen, like a sword array. It seemed like they were hiding their tracks. There was no sign of them chasing after him. -11. Chapter 2787. Moreover, most of these swordsmen were disciples of the drawing sword sect. Only a small portion of them were disciples of the first or second grade of the illusory sword sect. How could they be here to kill him? This is strange. What are these swordsmen doing? Since I have to find someone to ask, I might as well go and take a look. Xiao Hua thought. His eyes turned, and he withdrew the Imperial Thunder Transformation's lightning escape technique. He quietly changed it to wind escape technique, and used the Devil Realm's concealment technique to stealthily approach those ambushing sword cultivators. However, before he could get close to those swordsmen, he saw that the swordsmen's bodies suddenly flashed with sword light. They all flew out from their hiding places and flew up into the sky like a swarm of locusts. Damn it, I'm afraid. There are tens of thousands of people. Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbstruck. They are fighting against my Dao sect cultivators? My Dao sect cultivators, when did they advance to this place? When Xiao Hua sensed the scene, he unconsciously stood in the air. His eyes stared straight ahead, and he muttered, "My goodness, why are there so many people? Who should I ask for directions?" Of course, right in front of Xiao Hua, there was a large plain. Although the plain was covered in snow, it was already different from the rest of Huan country. The snow was not frozen solid. Instead, it was similar to the snow that Xiao Hua had seen before. It was somewhat like cotton wool, fluffy and piled up on the ground. When one stepped on it, mud and snow would definitely splash up. It was no longer the solid ice of Huan country. Looking at the snowy plain again, there were actually two groups of people preparing to fight to the death. The ones closest to Xiao Hua, needless to say, were the tens of thousands of swordsmen who were lying in ambush just now. However, the ones confronting these tens of thousands of swordsmen were not the Dao sect cultivators that Xiao Hua had imagined. Instead, it was a group of people who not only dressed strangely, but also had a somewhat different appearance. These people who made Xiao Hua dumbfounded, there were probably tens of thousands of them. These people were all dark, thin, and short. Every one of them had strange patterns engraved on their bodies. Some of these patterns were like beasts, some were like birds, and some were like ferocious ghost faces and white ghastly holes. Looking at the attire of these people, it could be said that there were all kinds of strange things. Some only used some leaves to wrap around their waists, some used vines to wrap around their necks, and some even used something that looked like leaves to wrap around their heads. In short, none of them were wearing proper clothes, and none of them were wearing a complete robe. Looking at the hands of these people, they didn't have any flying swords, nor did they have any artifacts or treasures that Xiao Hua was familiar with. However, they weren't empty-handed either. Some of them were holding long white bones that had been polished until they were shiny and sharp. Some of them were holding several human skulls that were strung together. Each skull was painted with a strange color. There were even some people who were holding pieces of wood that had been carved. Some looked like snakes, while others looked like toads. These dark, thin people holding strange weapons were not standing on the ground, nor were they floating in the air. Instead, they were riding on the backs of strange spirit beasts. These spirit beasts were of different sizes. The small ones were about half a zhong in size, with jagged bones and flesh, and the big ones were several zhong in size, with huge bodies. However, no matter the size of the spirit beasts, each and every one of them was abnormally fierce. Each and every one of them roared with all their strength in place. If not for the restraints of the masters on their backs, they would have already rushed out. At this time, the sword cultivator had already flown into the air. With a flash of sword light, he had already launched an attack. But these dark, thin people did not seem to care at all, coldly watching. When they were about 100 zhong away from them, a strange sound came from somewhere among them. This sound was like the cry of cicadas, but also like the hiss of beasts, piercing straight into the horizon. Boom! Boom! As soon as the sound was heard, all the spirit beasts began to run. The loud noise immediately drowned out the sound of the command. The entire ground began to shake. The snow and mud mixed together and splashed high into the air. Wooa wooa wooa! A similarly strange sound came from the mouths of the people on the spirit beasts. This sound had a strange rhythm. These people, are they stupid? Xiao Hua stood blankly in the air, still muttering in a low voice, as if he had not woken up from the shock just now. They don't have any magic tools or flying swords. How can they fight against the sword cultivators who are attacking that side? But obviously, these dark, thin people were not idiots. Even the several tens of thousands of sword cultivators were somewhat afraid of these strange people riding on the backs of spirit beast. The swordsmen did not want to form a sword formation like the cultivators, but rather arranged themselves in a neat formation, attacking from 3 sides. Not a single swordsman stepped out of the formation. Buzz buzz tilde the flying swords of the several tens of thousands of swordsmen could not be underestimated. The sword lights were almost connected into one, like the rising tide of the sea, slowly and courageously rushing toward the tide of spirit beast. Woo 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 woo. Wa I woo woo. A strange sound with an obscure rhythm rang out. In the tide of spirit beasts, the several tens of thousands of dark, thin people opened their mouths at the same time. This sound was noisy at first, like the buzzing of bees, but then it gradually echoed, as if the same person was singing. Finally, just before the swordsman came into contact with them, layers of faint green brilliance emerged from the tide of spirit beasts. Soul cultivators. These are soul cultivators. Seeing this scene, how could Xiao Hua, who practiced soul cultivation techniques, not see it? These several tens of thousands of dark, thin people were none other than the mysterious soul cultivators of Meng Mountain. Why did they run into the Hung country, to fight against sword cultivators? Although Xiao Hua had made countless guesses about the appearance of soul cultivators, and even imagined many scenarios of meeting soul cultivators, he did not expect this kind of soul cultivator to be like this. How could he ever have guessed that soul cultivators would be like this? Furthermore, he had encountered soul cultivators much earlier than he had expected. While Xiao Hua was still in shock, the beast tide of soul cultivators had already collided with the sword cultivators. The faint green brilliance caused by the chanting of soul cultivators grew thicker and thicker. Like strands of tentacles, it penetrated deep into the sword formation of the sword cultivators. When the sword cultivators touched the faint green brilliance, the sword lights on their bodies were annihilated, and they fell from the sky with their eyes closed. When their corpses fell to the ground, many of them were trampled by the spirit beasts of soul cultivators. Some of them had their bones and flesh broken, and some of them had their blood splattered everywhere. For a moment, they were mixed with the snow and mud. Looking again, many of the swordsmen's sword lights had also pierced into the faint green brilliance, and the sword lights around these swordsmen had also blocked the corrosion of the faint green brilliance. All of the sword lights were aimed precisely at the soul cultivator's forehead, right in between his eyebrows. But as soon as the sword lights got close to the soul cultivator, a roar could be heard coming from the spirit beasts beneath the soul cultivator. From their mouths, noses, and feet, different colored lights could be seen shooting out from their mouths, noses, and feet to block the sword lights with a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Just like that, the incomparably sharp flying sword of the soul cultivator was blocked by the spirit beast. While chanting, the soul cultivator swung the sword in his hand. A strange wave of energy came out from the soul armament to attack the sword cultivator. BZZ. Some of the swordsmen were able to defend against the soul cultivator's attack, while others were unable to defend against the soul cultivator's attack. Some of the swordsmen were forced to retreat, while others fell from the sky as if they had lost consciousness. Of course, there were also powerful sword cultivators who managed to break through the soul cultivator's defense. Their sword lights were like lightning, and their sword lights were like rainbows as they pierced through the soul cultivator's forehead and killed him on top of his spirit beast. But strangely enough, the spirit beasts didn't break free from the soul cultivator's control because of the soul cultivator's death. Instead, they let out mournful howls, withered to the ground, and slowly lost their life force. Then, they launched their final attack and died under the sword cultivator's sword. Not a single one of them survived. The entire battlefield was filled with the sounds of battle, and the chanting of the soul cultivator grew louder and louder. Even though Xiao Hua was hidden in the distance, his forehead was still slightly swollen and trembling. It was even a little hot. So this is how soul cultivators fight. Xiao Hua was afraid of being discovered by the soul cultivators and sword cultivators, so he didn't dare to release his divine will and Buddhist awareness. Instead, he used the demon realm's concealment technique to hide in midair. As he observed carefully, he couldn't help but think to himself, this soul cultivator's technique is really mysterious. Even though this young master has cultivated the art of soul cultivation to the level of pure spirit heaven, I'm still confused. I don't know if this soul cultivator is using soul threads, or just relying on soul items. However, from now on, this young master somewhat understood that the physique of a soul cultivator is not as strong as that of a sword cultivator, and they don't have as many offensive techniques as the cultivators of my Dao sect. They also need to rely on the strength of spirit beasts to defend themselves. In fact, the life and death of these spirit beasts are tied together with the life and death of the soul cultivator. But, why don't these swordsmen form a powerful sword formation? Aren't the yin-yang sword formation and the 5 elements splitting edge sword formation extremely powerful? Also, these sword cultivators, aren't they too ostentatious? The battle between them and my Dao sect hasn't ended yet, and they've provoked the soul cultivators here. How many swordsmen do they have in Huan Kingdom? Can they resist the pincer attack of the Dao sect and millions of Meng mountains? While Xiao Hua was lost in thought, the battle raged on. Swordsmen fell one after another, and the dark and skinny soul cultivators fell as well. Sword cultivators and soul cultivators were tangled up in a melee, and corpses were being tossed to the ground one after another. However, the dark green aura didn't decline. Instead, as the number of vengeful souls increased, it became even redder. Of course, the sword cultivators who could fight until now all had some tricks up their sleeves. The ordinary tricks of soul cultivators were useless, and couldn't hurt their souls. Comparatively speaking, how could the soul cultivators be ordinary? They also had defensive techniques that could block the flying swords of the sword cultivators. Roughly 4 hours later, more than half of the tens of thousands of sword cultivators and soul cultivators had perished. The entire battle seemed to be in a stalemate. Coo-coo tilde, the ear-piercing cry of a bird pierced Xiao Hua's ears like a sharp sword. It was a very strange sound. Xiao Hua's body trembled, and he nearly broke free from his concealment technique. When he turned his head to look at the source of the sound, he was even more shocked. -11. Chapter 2788. Behind the soul cultivator, there was a dense swarm of spirit fowl flying through the air. These spirit fowl were vastly different from the spirit fowl of the Dao school. Not only were their feathers not as bright and colorful, their bodies weren't as light either. The spirit fowl in front was roughly 30 meters long. The 80-meter-long body was as thick as a mountain and covered in dense patterns. Some of the patterns looked like eyes, some looked like skeletons, and there were even some that looked like corpses dripping with blood. The front of the spirit fowl had a small head that was flat and a tail that was about 20 meters long. The wings on the back of the spirit fowl were several meters long and shone with a grayish-black light. On top of the spirit fowl was a skinny soul warrior. He wore simple black armor and held a trident in his hand that was about a meter long. The soul warrior's eyes shone brightly. Even though the armor covered his face, Xiao Hua could still see the sharpness in his eyes. Behind the soul warrior were 100 or so other soul warriors. Their spirit fowl couldn't compare to the spirit fowl of the soul warrior in front, but they were still several meters long and had different patterns on them. Outside of the soul warrior's armor, his bare skin was covered in strange black and white patterns, just like the previous soul warriors. Behind them were several tens of thousands of soul warriors. They weren't wearing any armor. Aside from the spirit fowl they rode, they were all similar to the soul warriors fighting on the ground. That ear-piercing shriek came from the spirit bird at the front. The spirit bird's sharp gaze swept across the battlefield, and it let out a few gu-gu sounds. In an instant, the entire group of spirit birds became noisy. They did not even need the leader at the front to give the order, and they all swooped down. Whiz, whiz. The sword cultivators on the ground were terrified by the approach of the soul cultivators. Their swords let out a mournful wail as they flew up into the air, circled around in midair, and then charged in the opposite direction of the soul cultivators, disregarding everything else. As for the soul cultivators' spirit beasts, they were enormous in size, but also incredibly fast. Hundreds of spirit beasts led the charge, causing the air to tremble as they flew across the battlefield in pursuit of the soul cultivators. More and more swordsmen fell to the soul warriors' soul armaments and spirit beasts. The entire army of swordsmen was completely defeated, and the remaining tens of thousands of swordsmen fled in panic. All the soul warriors, regardless of whether they were on the ground or in the air, had to chase after them. Woo 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 tilde tilde tilde, an extremely cheerful cry came out from the spirit warrior's mouth. All of the soul cultivators stopped what they were doing, and all of the soul warriors began to cheer. Then, all of the soul warriors landed on the ground and began to dance. It was almost as if they were celebrating. Xiao Hua was very familiar with the way they danced. Wasn't it similar to the way the primordial spirit danced in the mysterious dark clouds? As for those spirit beasts, they were either dancing on the ground or dancing in the air. All of them were familiar with each other, and all of them cooperated harmoniously. Motherfucker, this is possible. Xiao Hua watched in disbelief as the limbs of these spirit warriors began to perform unimaginable movements. As the spirit warriors danced, their previously pale faces and even their shriveled bodies regained their vigor and vitality. Their bodies were also somewhat plump. I understand now. Xiao Hua suddenly realized. These soul cultivators need to use soul techniques in battle, and these soul warriors must have damaged their bodies. These soul cultivators are actually using the primordial spirit cultivation method on their bodies. This is a way to make up for the injuries they've suffered before. As expected, the green light that filled the battlefield had already dimmed. It seemed to have been absorbed by the soul cultivators and spirit beasts. The soul warriors rejoiced for at least an hour. Then, they cheered as they rushed into the mud and blood. They lifted up the bodies of the sword cultivators and swiftly cut off the heads. Then, they took the vines from their waists and strapped them to their chests. As for the bodies and storage bags, they placed them on the backs of the spirit beasts. For a moment, blood flowed out and dripped onto the bodies of the soul cultivators and spirit beasts. However, they simply turned a blind eye to it. Looking at their skillful selection and searching everywhere, Xiao Hua understood that these bodies were killed by the soul cultivators themselves. When everyone found the bodies of the swordsmen they had killed, they quietly looked at the soul cultivator in front of them. When the soul cultivator made a strange sound and raised his hand, everyone became even more frenzied. They were no longer as orderly as before. Instead, they began to snatch the bodies of the swordsmen. This time, not only were they snatching the bodies of the swordsmen, but they were also snatching the bodies of the soul cultivators and spirit beasts that had fallen. Alas, uncivilized people. A land of barbarians. Xiao Hua shook his head and sighed. No wonder the cultivators of my Dao sect, and even the swordsmen, don't put these millions of soul cultivators in their eyes. After the time it took to eat a meal, they saw that there was nothing but broken limbs, mud, and blood on the battlefield. Only then did all the soul cultivators regroup and slowly return to where they came from. Xiao Hua wasn't in a hurry to show himself. Instead, he waited for the time it took to brew a cup of tea before he used the Devil World's concealment technique to fly towards the battlefield. He had just flown to a place a few dozen meters away from the battlefield when the smell of blood that soared to the sky filled his mouth and nose. Within this smell of blood that didn't disperse for a long time, there was even an incomparably vicious aura. Although Xiao Hua didn't release the Buddha Surya, he could still deeply feel the anguished wails of the fallen souls on the battlefield. Alas, Xiao Hua sighed. Just as he was about to reveal himself and release the Buddha's Surya, he suddenly frowned and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. Not far from where he was, he saw a woman with a slim figure flying toward him on a cloud. If he saw this woman anywhere else, Xiao Hua might not have paid attention to her. But this place had just experienced a great battle between sword cultivators and soul cultivators, and the smell of blood had yet to dissipate. How could he not be astonished when this woman appeared? However, when the woman flew closer, Xiao Hua unconsciously became a little absent-minded. The woman was in her early teens. Her delicate face was rosy and cute, and her eyes were as thin as the moon. Her two faint eyebrows hung above the crescent moon like a wisp of smoke. Coupled with her light red lips and small upturned nose, she was as elegant as an ink painting. Coupled with her two little braids, she was even prettier than the girls who walked out of the New Year's painting. If the woman's appearance was like this, then there was no need to talk about her figure. Her waist was as thin as a willow branch, and her upper body was dressed in a thin green robe. The slight bulge in front of her chest was a clear indication of her youthful beauty. As for the woman's lower body, she was dressed in a red dress. Under the dress, her snow-white calves were straight and delicate, and her bare ankles and feet were round and delicate. This woman was actually so alluring. Although she was still young, and there was still some immaturity between her eyebrows, in Xiao Hua's eyes, his heart couldn't help but be stirred. Tilda, this woman is a little strange. Xiao Hua was absent-minded for a moment, then he immediately sucked in a breath of cold air and hurriedly shifted his gaze away from the woman's body. However, the woman's slim figure and white feet were still swaying in front of his eyes. It's still a little strange. Xiao Hua regained his senses and suddenly came to a realization. After looking at her for a while, I only felt that this woman's eyes were full of spirit. But I actually didn't look carefully at her eyes. Sure enough, when Xiao Hua carefully looked at the woman's eyes again, those moon-like eyes were really like smoke. The eyes in her eyes seemed to be there but not there. For a moment, it was an ordinary pitch-black color, and for a moment, it was like a misty deep pool, and as Xiao Hua focused his gaze seemed to be about to sink into the woman's eyes. Xiao Hua's mind was slightly blurred, and God's guidance operated vigilantly. Xiao Hua immediately came to his senses and hurriedly retracted his gaze, then sucked in a breath of cold air again. Strange. Where did this woman come from? Xiao Hua secretly shouted, his heart was filled with doubts. This woman didn't realize that she was being spied on by Xiao Hua, and while jumping, she flew onto the battlefield. When she saw the cruelty of the battlefield, the woman's brows slightly wrinkled. She hesitated for a moment in midair, then she actually descended a bit, slowly flying on the battlefield. As she flew, her lips slightly moved, and her gaze scanned the surroundings, as if she was looking for something. About the time it took to smoke a cigarette, the woman roughly looked over the battlefield once, then flew up again with some disappointment, looking around. It should be here. I can't be wrong. But there's nothing here. The woman's voice was like a silver bell, and even more so like a clear spring gurgling out of a mountain rock, cool and refreshing to the ear. Hey, what is this girl looking for? Xiao Hua couldn't help but feel anxious for her, wishing that he could help her find it. Come out. I can see you. The woman shouted towards a certain place, as if she was playing hide-and-seek with someone else. Xiao Hua hid there, and couldn't help but smile. He had always been here, but he had never seen anyone else hiding there. How could he not know that this was the woman's bluff? If it was somewhere else, Xiao Hua might have flown out and said a few words to this woman. But this place was Huan country, and a great battle had just happened. This woman suddenly appeared, although she didn't have an inch of armor, and he couldn't see any special cultivation. Who knew what this woman's background was? Of course, Xiao Hua was almost certain that this woman was definitely not a sword cultivator, nor was she a cultivator of the Dao sect, but was she a soul cultivator? Thinking about that ugly and barbaric soul cultivator just now, Xiao Hua himself denied it. Were soul cultivators such beautiful people? -11. Chapter 2789. How could this girl, who was still a budding flower but was already so attractive, be an unenlightened person like Wen Shan in Meng Mountain? But this girl wasn't a swordsman, nor was she a cultivator or a soul warrior. Who could she be? If she was an ordinary woman, no one would believe that she would be able to wear thin clothes in the cold weather of the Huan Kingdom, not to mention that she would be able to come here on a cloud. Since he couldn't see her cultivation level, then, it could be said that she was unfathomable. Even though Xiao Hua didn't have any warning signs and didn't feel that this girl was a threat to him, he still didn't want to show himself. If worst comes to worst, I'll let her search here for half a day. If she doesn't see anyone, won't she leave? Although Xiao Hua was somewhat anxious, he didn't dare to act rashly. He was really afraid that if he moved, he would be discovered by this strange girl. Unexpectedly, the girl circled around to the left and unexpectedly landed. She calmly sat down on a pile of snow and casually grabbed a clump of snow in her hand. Using a bit of strength, she squeezed it into a snowball. Looking left and right, she swung her arm and threw it out. Pa! It smashed into some grey vegetation on the snow. Immediately, The girl used her hand to support her cheek and lowered her head to look at the snow and mud. She seemed somewhat absent-minded. Seeing that the girl had actually sat there for half a day, Xiao Hua somewhat couldn't bear it. He had no reason to accompany this girl who seemed to be playing here and wasting time for no reason. Since he couldn't ask for directions here, he might as well go somewhere else to look. Thinking, Xiao Hua slightly moved and was about to use a concealment technique to leave. But just as he moved, the girl raised her head and looked at Xiao Hua's location. She playfully said, "I see you, quickly come out." The girl raised her face and smiled like a flower. It was a kind of smile that came from the heart. "I've been waiting for you for so long, you actually didn't come out to see me. Are you willing to let me wait for you in this world of ice and snow?" Xiao Hua sighed, knowing that he was still discovered by this girl. His figure flashed in midair, and he touched his nose and said with a bitter smile, "Little girl, the person you're looking for isn't here. I've already stopped here for half a day. Besides the soul cultivator and swordsman who were fighting just now, no one else has come. If you want to find someone, you should go somewhere else." "How did you know that I was looking for someone else?" The girl stood up, tilted her head and looked at Xiao Hua. She smiled and said, "Why am I not looking for you?" "You. Are you looking for me?" Xiao Hua was greatly surprised. "You and I have never met before. Why are you looking for me?" "Don't ask me why I'm looking for you." The girl chuckled. "Let me ask you first, are you looking for someone?" "Hey, that's right. How do you know I'm looking for someone?" Xiao Hua asked curiously. "But aren't you looking for someone too?" "Hehe, don't ask me how I know you're looking for someone. I only know that I know you're looking for someone, just like how I know I'm looking for you. Moreover, I can only find you here." Although these words were extremely difficult to pronounce, this girl's words were very catchy and pleasant to listen to. "Well, since you know I'm looking for someone, then tell me where the person I'm looking for is," Xiao Hua said helplessly. "Then, tell me why you're looking for me." The girl tilted her head slightly and said with a smile, "My name is Juxia, what's your name?" "My name is Xiao Hua." Xiao Hua did not hide anything and replied, "Xiao Hua. Strange. Why are you called Xiao Hua?" Hearing Xiao Hua's name, Juxia was a little surprised. After thinking for a moment, she asked, "Other than Xiao Hua, do you have any other names?" "Oh." Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, and asked curiously, "What do you think my name should be?" "Hehe, looks like you're really called Xiao Hua." Juxia giggled and said, "But why did you, a Dao sect's Jindan stage cultivator, run to the sword domain? At this time, isn't the battle between the Dao sect and the sword cultivators going on in the Sky Patrol City? Aren't I looking for someone?" Xiao Hua also smiled slightly. "Nothing is more important than looking for someone. Don't you think so?" Right. Looking for someone is the most important thing," Juxia said with a smile. "Although I am Xiao Hua and don't have any other names, but can you tell me where the person I'm looking for is?" Xiao Hua asked. Unfortunately, Juxia shook her head slightly. "Where is the person you're looking for?" "I don't know. But I know where you should go." "Where to?" Xiao Hua asked. "Sword Peak," Juxia replied without hesitation. "Oh, Sword Peak. Where is that?" Xiao Hua was slightly stunned, and asked, "Is it near the Flowing Cloud Lake?" "Flowing Cloud Lake?" Juxia thought for a moment, then shook her head. "The Flowing Cloud Lake is a place at the border between the Million Meng Mountains and the Sword Domain, but the Sword Peak is within the Sword Domain, and the two are in different direction." "In which direction is the Flowing Cloud Lake?" Xiao Hua asked. Unfortunately, at this point, Juxia did not answer, and instead asked, "Don't you want to know why I'm looking for you?" "Yes." Xiao Hua answered without hesitation, "But I want to know where the Flowing Cloud Lake is even more. Actually, I want to ask you for a favor." Juxia hesitated slightly. "However, I know that if I say it now, you will definitely refuse, so I can't tell you right now." "Strange, you didn't say that I know if I can help you. If you want me to help you, you must tell me first." Xiao Hua was even more puzzled. But Juxia still shook her head. "You don't have to ask this, I naturally know that you will refuse once I say it." "Forget it, Tell me where the flowing cloud lake is, Xiao Hua said helplessly. You don't have to go to the flowing cloud lake, you can go directly to the sword peak. Zhu Xia did not tell Xiao Hua the location of the flowing cloud lake. Why should I listen to you? Xiao Hua looked up and down at Zhu Xia. If you don't tell me the direction of the flowing cloud lake, I can go to other places to ask. This is the battlefield of sword cultivators and soul cultivators. Zhu Xia said with a smile, I'm afraid you can't understand the words of soul cultivators. And sword cultivators are all in groups. You, a cultivator of the Dao sect, want to ask for directions. I'm afraid it won't be easy, right? Mph, don't worry about that. Xiao Hua snorted coldly. Ian, you should have a way to ask. Zhu Xia was not angry, and said indifferently, but, if you go to the flowing cloud lake, then your beloved will lose her life. Only if you go to the sword peak and bring me along will your beloved be able to live. You. Do you believe it? You. Are you willing to bet? Why would I bet with you for no reason? Xiao Hua was happy, since you know everything, what else do you want to bet with me? Zhu Xia smiled slightly, with a face full of pride, and said, actually, I only know that I can find someone here, he can help me a lot. And I also know where to go next. As for the rest, it's all my own guesses. Ah, you guessed it yourself? Xiao Hua was stunned. You said it so well, I thought you knew. But how did you know? Without waiting for Xiao Hua to finish speaking, Zhu Xia interrupted him and said, you, a cultivator of the Dao sect, actually took the risk of a great sword battle to accompany this person to the sword domain, and even went so deep. I'm afraid everyone knows about the dangers involved, right? Tell me, if it was just a normal friendship, would you take such a huge risk? This. Xiao Hua laughed bitterly again, and couldn't help but rub his nose again. He was somewhat at a loss for words, and his previous abnormal vigilance had also relaxed a little. Although the true essence around his body was circulating from time to time, guarding against Zhu Xia's sneak attack at any time, Xiao Hua really believed that she didn't have any ill intentions. You don't have to let your guard down like this. It's better to circulate the true essence protecting your body, Zhu Xia said mischievously. Who knows if I have any ulterior motives towards you? Xiao Hua's mind moved, and his true essence slightly slackened. Zhu Xia sensed it, and said with a sharp mind. You. Xiao Hua was helpless. This Zhu Xia was indeed very sensitive, as if she knew the spiritual qi of heaven and earth and even the movements of other people like the back of her hand. However, this sensitivity, when compared to her exquisite heart aperture, was extremely inferior. It was as if she could completely guess his thoughts with just a single sentence. However, don't worry, I still need to ask you for help, so how could I attack you? Zhu Xia said again, moreover, I can't see through your cultivation. If you want to escape, I definitely won't be able to catch up to you. Xiao Hua saw that Zhu Xia was so confident, and just as he was about to say something, she didn't give him the time or opportunity to do so, and continued, moreover, when you saw me, you were only slightly absent-minded, and your mind wasn't lost at all. Either you practiced a secret technique, or you have a beloved Dao companion in your heart. For a young cultivator like you with a profound cultivation, the female cultivators chasing after you are like moths to a flame. Xiao Hua opened his mouth again. Zhu Xia stretched out her index finger and placed it on her lips. This action caused Xiao Hua's heart to jump, and he couldn't help but stop talking, as if he was afraid of destroying the beauty within. Wait for me to finish speaking. That kind of coquettishness was very natural, but it was also extremely seductive and infectious. Xiao Hua looked at her in a daze, and didn't say anything else. Zhu Xia was very satisfied, and said again, rather than believe that you practiced a secret technique, it's better to believe that you already have a beloved Dao companion in your heart. Moreover, you wanted to ask me for directions as soon as we met, so naturally, you're burning with impatience to find her. If it wasn't for your beloved, would you prepare to leave this place in such a hurry? You don't even want to say a few more words to me. Ordinary people have an old saying, as long as there are 3 reasons to do something, then it should be done. I can find so many reasons for this matter, so do you think I'm still not sure? -11. Chapter 2790. You are really too smart. Xiao Hua helplessly nodded his head. He shifted his gaze away from Zhu Xia's beautiful face, which was inferior to her intelligence. He muttered, although what you said is not correct, but your guess is correct. Where did I guess wrong? Zhu Xia asked in disbelief. Hihi, no need. You don't know everything. Being able to guess the result is already very good. Xiao Hua was powerless to argue with her. He waved his hand and said, since you already know that I am going to find my lover, then quickly tell me what I can help you with so that I can go to Flowing Cloud Lake. Zhu Xia shook her head and said, you are wrong. Didn't I just say it? If I say it now, you definitely won't help me. Why should I say it? Secondly, you definitely can't go to Flowing Cloud Lake. You are going to Sword Edge Peak. Moreover, when you go to Sword Edge Peak, you should also bring me along. Ah, bring you along? Xiao Hua was really puzzled. He looked at the exceptionally intelligent and mysterious Zhu Xia and said, I don't even know who you are, let alone where you came from. Why should I bring you along? My name is Zhu Xia. Didn't I just say it? Zhu Xia mischievously said, as for where I come from, is that important? Moreover, I am only following you to see what you can help me with. When I am able to ask you for help, I will ask you for help. Ah! So, you still don't know what you need my help with? Xiao Hua suddenly realized. Hihi, yes. Zhu Xia slyly replied. I didn't promise to help you. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand. What a joke. Even this mysterious Zhu Xia couldn't do it. How could he do it? He definitely couldn't agree to such a difficult task. You will definitely agree. Zhu Xia confidently replied. Impossible. Xiao Hua shook his head like a rattledrum. Unexpectedly, Zhu Xia didn't argue with him like before. Instead, she smiled and said, it's okay. If you are not willing to help when I ask you for help, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Just pretend that you've never seen me alone. Xiao Hua had always been amenable to coaxing but not coercion. Hearing this girl's pitiful words, he hesitated and wanted to say something. Zhu Xia flew up first and said, let's go. Just now, we could dawdle for a while to dispel your suspicions. But now, we have to go. If you don't go now, your lover will be in trouble. You're going too? Xiao Hua helplessly asked. You just need to point in the direction of Flowing Cloud Lake. Not only me, but the place we're going to isn't Flowing Cloud Lake either. Zhu Xia corrected him again, but this time, he spat out, the Sword Edge Peak is a part of the Sword Domain, and it only takes a few days to reach there. The Flowing Cloud Lake is far, and you won't be able to reach there in less than 10 days. Could it be that you want to give up what's close at hand and seek what's far away? All right. Hearing that the Sword Edge Peak wasn't far, Xiao Hua agreed. If he didn't meet Fairy Hongxia and the others at the Sword Edge Peak, he could still speed up and reach the Flowing Cloud Lake. Looking at Zhu Xia's mysterious appearance, if Fairy Hongxia really went to the Sword Edge Peak because of some accident and he didn't go to rescue her, wouldn't he regret it for the rest of his life? However, seeing that Zhu Xia didn't turn back, it was as if she already knew that he had to go with her. Forget it. Xiao Hua didn't have any countermeasures to deal with this seemingly harmless girl. He sighed and followed her. Oh, you. Is this the lightning evasion technique? It's actually so powerful. Seeing Xiao Hua using the lightning evasion technique to chase after her, Zhu Xia was somewhat astonished. Yen, I am a disciple of the Imperial Lightning Sect in the country of Shi. Naturally, I know the lightning evasion technique. This wasn't considered a secret, so Xiao Hua didn't hesitate to answer. That is really strange. Zhu Xia didn't feel relieved because of Xiao Hua's answer. Instead, she was somewhat puzzled and slightly frowned. This frown of Zhu Xia's seemed to be a casual action, but it was filled with endless charm. It actually made Xiao Hua's heart ache slightly. Ari, I finally understand. Xiao Hua hurriedly shifted his gaze away and sighed. This Zhu Xia isn't too beautiful. It's just that her aura is truly superhuman. Moreover, there's a natural charm on top of her aura. This charm seeps into her bones and makes people involuntarily feel pity for her. After flying for a few days, Seeing Zhu Xia constantly changing directions and not flying directly towards the sun, Xiao Hua was somewhat bewildered. He couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you flying directly towards the Sword Edge Peak? Why? Why do you keep changing directions?" "Change directions?" Zhu Xia was somewhat stunned. "When did I change directions? I've always been flying towards the Sword Edge Peak." Xiao Hua pointed at the sun and said, "In these few days, you've already deviated from the sun several times." "The sun's direction?" Zhu Xia was even more shocked. She raised her head to look at the sun and then looked at the direction she was flying in. She was very puzzled. It seems that even with Zhu Xia's intelligence, she still couldn't understand Xiao Hua's poor sense of direction. "You tell me the direction, I'll lead the way," Xiao Hua said, somewhat unconvinced. "Naturally, it's in front." Zhu Xia chuckled as she looked at Xiao Hua and pointed. "Ari, that's right." Xiao Hua slapped his forehead. Facing Zhu Xia, he seemed to have really become an idiot. Immediately after, Xiao Hua flew forward. However, because Zhu Xia was behind him, Xiao Hua was afraid that he would fly in the wrong direction. After flying for a while, he peeked at the sun and then flew again. However, not long after flying, Zhu Xia flew up with a smile like a flower and said, "Don't fly, you've already flown in the wrong direction." "How is that possible?" Xiao Hua looked at the sun in the sky in disbelief. The position didn't change at all. Although Zhu Xia had a smile on her face, she didn't have any intention of ridicule. She pointed at the sun in the sky and explained, "You're using the sun as the indicator, so naturally it's not wrong. However, the sun of the sword domain is different from the sun of the cultivation 3 nations. Don't look at how it's always hanging there motionlessly. In fact, it has long changed its position. It's just that the sky is really big, so you didn't notice it. This sun is also changing its position." Xiao Hua was instantly exposed by Zhu Xia, but he didn't find it strange. He asked curiously, "The Huan nation isn't that far from the cultivation 3 nations. Why is there such a big difference in the astronomical phenomena? As the secular people say, people in the same village have different sounds. Isn't that the case?" Zhu Xia said very patiently, "Don't look at how the sword domain is close to the Shi nation and the Huan nation. The sword domain is a long and narrow territory like a curved canyon. It's also located in the extreme north. That sun, Ro, there's no need to say more. Isn't the alternation of the sun and moon greatly different from the Shi nation?" "This is true." Xiao Hua nodded helplessly. "This kind of phenomenon is common in the Dawn Rain continent. Perhaps you'll naturally know in the future." Zhu Xia didn't seem to like to explain, but she really needed Xiao Hua's help, so she patiently explained. However, she didn't want to say more, so she changed the topic. "Besides, just now, didn't you feel that you were flying straight? Although you occasionally looked at the sun, the direction didn't change." How did you know I was going to say it?" Xiao Hua was astonished. These words were exactly what he wanted to refute Zhu Xia, but after hearing Zhu Xia's explanation, he felt a little guilty and didn't dare to say anything. "Don't tell me you know everything. This is also my guess." Zhu Xia seemed to like to show off her cleverness, and she was happy to explain this kind of extremely accurate guess. "Actually, everyone's feeling is based on the things around them as a reference. Just now, you felt that you were flying straight, but in fact, you've been using the sun as a reference. The real you has already deviated from the real direction. Of course, even if there's no reference, when people are flying, 99% of them will deviate from their own direction. Believing in feelings is actually not reliable. It's just that there are some places to refer to, so you can correct your direction." "Ayo, isn't that so?" Xiao Hua thought for a bit. Not to mention that Zhu Xia's words were quite profound. Even if it was based on his normal experience of finding his destination, Zhu Xia's words were extremely accurate. "But, you came here to find me, isn't it just a feeling?" Xiao Hua said, rather unconvinced. "Hehe, my feeling is different from others," Zhu Xia said with a smile. "I'm the one who's outside of the 99%. Zhu Xia was so happy, and in these few days, Xiao Hua's vigilance had been greatly reduced, almost treating her as the little sister next door. "What else can you guess?" Xiao Hua also tilted his head and asked. I can guess. Next, you'll let me lead the way. Zhu Xia covered her mouth with her hand and laughed. Ari, yeah, this seems like I can guess it myself. Xiao Hua was speechless. Let's go. Zhu Xia waved her hand and flew to the front. Only then was Xiao Hua truly convinced and obediently flew behind Zhu Xia. However, looking at Zhu Xia happily jumping and flying in front of him, and then looking at her graceful waist and smooth lines, cough cough, it seems like it's not bad. Another 2 days passed, and a perfectly straight mountain peak appeared in front of him. It was like a treasured sword piercing into the sky from the ground. Xiao Hua understood that this should be the Sword Edge Peak. The miraculous creation of heaven and earth is nothing more than this. The 3 peaks of Taiqing sect, Tianzhu Peak of Lian Country, and the Sword Edge Peak of Huan Country are all similar. They are all so majestic. When Xiao Hua saw the Sword Edge Peak, he couldn't help but sigh with emotion as he recalled his encounter at Tianzhu Peak. Legend has it that the Sword Edge Peak of the Sword Domain was left behind by a sword god. At that time, a devil god from the upper realm escaped to the Sword Domain for some unknown reason. He ate swordsmen alive and wanted to turn the Sword Domain into a devil world. This sword god fought with the demonic god of the lower realm for dozens of days before finally defeating and killing the demonic god. However, the sword god himself died from heavy injuries. This Sword Edge Peak is formed from the divine sword in his hand. Zhu Xia explained with a smile as he flew ahead without turning his head. -11. Chapter 2791. I don't care who created this sword peak. I just want to know where I can. Xiao Hua had already released his divine sense, but he could not find any trace of Fairy Hongxia and the others. Just as he was talking to Zhu Xia with a smile, he suddenly stopped. The smile froze on his face and disappeared in an instant. A layer of frost hung on his face. There are 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen over there. I can't guarantee that I can kill all of them at the same time. If you help me, I will definitely help you. Hehe, I told you that you would definitely agree to help me. Zhu Xia laughed, but then she said, however, this is not my help. You don't have to promise me now. This kind of bullying, even if it was me, I would still take action. So, I won't take this opportunity to blackmail you. Up to you. Xiao Hua's tone had already turned cold. The brilliance around his body flickered. Rumble. Thunder rumbled from under his feet. His entire figure streaked across the sky and flew towards a certain direction at lightning speed. Oh! Zhu Xia's small mouth opened slightly. She looked at Xiao Hua's imperial thunder transformation with some surprise. Then, a burst of splendor appeared in her eyes. There was even a thoughtful look on her face. Sure enough, my calculation was right. This Xiao Hua is indeed the person who can solve this predicament. But, how can he solve this huge predicament? This really makes me puzzled. Zhu Xia whispered, and flew away. Although she could not catch up with Xiao Hua, she was not much slower. Senior brother. On the flowing cloud airship, Li Zongbao spat out a mouthful of blood. He could no longer support himself and collapsed on the flowing cloud airship. His face was pale gold, obviously the result of forcefully activating the immortal slaying whip. Fairy Hongxia could not help but cry out, reaching out to support Li Zongbao. Unfortunately, Fairy Hongxia herself was now an arrow at the end of its flight. Even moving her body was difficult. Although Xiao Maro could move at this time, he did not dare to slack off. He also used the dragon transformation art. The true core strength in his body poured into the flowing cloud airship like it was a spirit stone. He tried his best to activate the airship, trying to escape from the siege of the 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen. I'm fine. Li Zongbao slumped on the flying boat and struggled to pull out a jade bottle. Senior brother, I still have some pills here. It's from Xiao Langxin. Fairy Hongxia clapped her hands hurriedly and took out a jade bottle from her storage bag and handed it to Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao coughed, and blood gushed out of his mouth as he took the spirit pill and said, this guy, he actually forgot about his friends for the sake of his lover. It's been so long, Yet he still hasn't given me a spirit pill. Seeing Li Zongbao's rare teasing, Fairy Hongxia blushed slightly and whispered, he has always been a careless person. If senior brother wants it, you can ask. He is generous to his own family. I don't want it. I want to see when he'll remember it. Li Zongbao took the pill. His complexion improved a little as he spoke indifferently. Fairy Hongxia's eyes flashed with a hint of confusion. If senior brother doesn't mention it, I'm afraid he'll never remember it for the rest of his life. Actually, there are times when this concubine is also puzzled. Darling Xiao is sometimes extremely stingy, but sometimes he is extremely generous. Sometimes he is extremely careless, but sometimes he is extremely meticulous. Sometimes his strength is frighteningly high, but sometimes his cultivation level is so low that it makes one laugh. Li Zongbao continued. Sometimes he is as shrewd as a merchant, but sometimes he is as careless as a child. Xiao Maro could not help but chime in as well. It seemed like the three of them knew that they were in danger and would not be able to escape. Xiao Hua was thousands of miles away. Even if he wanted to rescue them, he would not be able to make it in time. Where did you tell Xiao Hua to meet up? Li Zongbao closed his eyes and asked softly. Drifting Cloud Lake. Fairy Hongxia answered without hesitation, that is the entrance to Million Meng Mountains from Huan Country. It is also a slightly safer passage to Million Meng Mountains. What a pity. Li Zongbao sighed. Xiao Hua is the best at getting lost. If he could get lost from Drifting Cloud Lake to here, that would be great. He is a directionally challenged idiot. Fairy Hongxia said with a smile, unable to hide her love for Xiao Hua. Li. Senior brother Li. Xiao Maro could not help but stutter. Senior sister, you guys listen. Fairy Hongxia and Li Zongbao were both injured. How could they be as strong as Xiao Maro? They glanced at each other in bewilderment. Thunder. Xiao Maro suddenly realized and shouted, this seems to be Big Brother's lightning escape technique. Ah! How is that possible? Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia were both shocked. Drifting Cloud Lake was extremely far away. How could Xiao Hua fly here? Quick, fly towards the thunder. Li Zongbao ordered loudly. Perhaps Xiao Hua is being chased by the sword. Once they thought of Xiao Hua being chased by the sword, Li Zongbao and the rest were shocked. Xiao Hua had separated from them in order to avoid the transformation sword. However, after the three of them circled around outside, they ran into this place again and ran into the transformation sword again. Xiao Maro hesitated. Let's go. Now that things have come to this, to die together, is also a blessing. Fairy Hongxia waved her hand and tried to open a small gap in the carnate primordial water. Sure enough, in just a short moment, the sound of thunder resounded in the sky. Darling Xiao tilde Fairy Hongxia could not help but murmur, her eyes slightly hot. Terrifying phoenix. If Xiao Maro could hear it, how could the 6th grade 3 illusory swordsman not hear it? Xiong Mufeng, who was about to go around the sword edge peak, stopped in mid-air. His eyes flashed with hesitation. The divine sword mystic technique was what he wanted. Moreover, he had flown in front of everyone. Xiao Hua was flying in front of him. If he could get the divine sword mystic technique before everyone else, he might be able to get some other benefit. After all, according to the news that came out from the 7 spiritual mountains, Xiao Hua was able to break the Brahma Pagoda array of the 7 spiritual mountains. Naturally, there would be a jade slip inside the array in his storage pouch. Although the Divine Sword Secret Codex had already been discussed and all 6 of them had a share, that storage pouch, there was no discussion. Whoever could get it would get it. Thinking of this, Xiong Mufeng's heart became hot. He urged the sword under his feet to fly towards the direction of the sound of thunder. However, after flying for 100 feet, Xiong Mufeng calmed down and hesitated. Nonsense, it was not like he did not know the expression of the terrifying phoenix when it killed the 4 grade 3 illusory swordsman. Didn't he team up with Wang Zhengqiang and the rest for this reason? How could he fly there alone? Wouldn't he be sending himself to death? Thinking of this, Xiong Mufeng hurriedly turned around and flew towards the direction of the flowing cloud flying ship. -11. Chapter 2792. However, what scared Xiong Mufeng the most was that his flying speed was far slower than the rumbling thunder behind him. When he used his divine will to scan the area behind him, he was scared out of his wit. Behind Xiong Mufeng, thunder rumbled in the sky, and dark clouds covered the sky. A tall and skinny cultivator was riding on the thunder. He could only see him through his divine will earlier, but now, he was already in Xiong Mufeng's field of vision. In fact, the moment Xiong Mufeng turned around, the cultivator with flashes of lightning around him had already caught up with him, as though he was the god of thunder himself. "Save me!" Xiong Mufeng was practically shouting for help in his heart. The lightning flashing around Xiao Hua's body was the anger in his heart. Although he didn't release his aura or divine sense, the boundless anger in his heart had already been displayed through the lightning. Xiong Mufeng had long sensed it in his heart. Xiong Mufeng did not dare to be careless anymore. He activated the sword origin around him with all his might. The sword light trembled rapidly, as if Xiong Mufeng was frightened. As the sword light was released, a sword intent that resembled falling maple leaves flashed around him. Then, Xiong Mufeng's figure disappeared again, and a huge sword slowly appeared in midair. Of course, this huge sword flew extremely quickly. It left behind a yellow glow in midair, just like the traces of time. However, Xiong Mufeng's time was indeed too short. He had only flown a few hundred feet back, and before he could even get close to the flowing cloud flying ship, he felt a violent aura and an indescribable sense of confinement descend from the sky. Although this restriction was not strong and was far from being able to restrict a third-grade illusory swordsman, once it got close to him, a sense of fear rose from the bottom of Xiong Mufeng's heart. It was as if he was born with it. Xiong Mufeng was a little puzzled. He didn't know what kind of mystical ability Xiao Hua used to confine him. However, just as he was puzzled, more than 10 bolts of heavenly lightning descended from the sky, answering his doubt. A bolt of lightning as thick as a thumb shot out from the dark clouds like a curved sword. It drew a beautiful arc in midair and struck the huge sword that Xiong Mufeng had transformed into. Hiss! An indescribable pain appeared all over Xiong Mufeng's body. Even his heart felt as if it was being pierced by dozens of small swords. Buzz! Xiong Mufeng's sword flashed, and the sound of his sword echoed through the sky. Amidst the lightning, he actually turned his sword around and slashed at Xiao Hua. A cold snort came from the heavenly lightning. Even though the sound wasn't loud, the rolling heavenly lightning couldn't stop it. Xiao Hua looked at Xiong Mufeng, who was charging towards him with sword chi, but he didn't even look at him. With a cold snort, he grabbed with his hand again. Dozens of heavenly lightning once again poured down like a waterfall. Moreover, with a slap of his hand, the yin-yang sword gourd flew out of the space. 2 green and red spirit-slaying primary rays flew out from the gourd and followed the falling heavenly lightning towards the giant sword. On the other hand, Xiao Hua's figure did not stop in front of Xiong Mufeng's huge sword. Instead, he quickly flew towards the flowing cloud airship. This was because when Xiao Hua appeared, Wang Zhengqiang and the rest's expressions changed. The 5 of them transformed into swords and increased their flying speed, chasing after the flowing cloud airship. On the flowing cloud airship, the Xiantian primordial water that was originally protecting the airship was now gradually fading away. Fairy Hong Xia had already held on for so long. When she saw Xiao Hua appear, she immediately relaxed. This relaxation was not a big deal. The Xiantian primordial water could no longer hold on, and it was all sucked back into the Ice Phoenix celestial body. As for Xiao Mao, his magic power had long been depleted. He was also desperately holding on by consuming pills to activate the dragon transformation art. Now, just like Fairy Hong Xia, his magic power had also collapsed. He could no longer draw out any magic power from his body. Just like that, the flowing cloud airship stopped in mid-air. Under the 5-sword chi, the 3 of them were like toddlers. They no longer had any strength to resist. "How dare you!" Xiao Hua roared angrily. He waved his hands, and hundreds of lightning bolts rumbled and fell from mid-air. It was as if the heavenly river had burst open, carrying Xiao Hua's fury as it struck the 5-sword chi. However, Xiao Hua was still too far away. Although the lightning bolts fell, the 5 huge swords had already flown to about 100 feet away from the flowing cloud airship. Under the sword light, the 3 of them would be easily killed. The lightning bolts were a little too far away. Xiao Hua opened his mouth, and the Dream Executioner and Mountain Splitter flew out at the same time. The 2 flying swords activated each other, and as fast as lightning, they slashed towards 2 of the swordsmen. Xiao Hua clapped his hands, and the Teng Jiao shears, which he had not used for a long time, also appeared. Similarly, a yellow light flashed and struck towards one of the swordsmen. At this time, Xiao Hua ignored Xiong Mufeng. Under the bombardment of the lightning bolts, it was difficult for him to maintain his sword chi form. The moment he revealed himself, the spirit-punishing vital light had already flown close. Xiong Mufeng only had time to spit out his natal sword before the spirit-punishing vital light chopped off his head. Quick! Xiao Hua pointed his finger at the yin-yang sword gourd, and the spirit-punishing vital light flashed in mid-air again, chasing after the green and red sword light that was extremely close to it. As soon as Xiao Hua saw him, he used all of his methods, wanting to save the flowing cloud flying ship in a short period of time. If it were any other time, Xiao Hua's methods could not be described as undeniably powerful, and they could not be described as unbelievably powerful. However, at this critical juncture, even with the Imperial Thunder transformation, Xiao Hua's speed was still a little slow. Especially when Wang Zhengqiang and the rest saw how easily Xiao Hua killed Xiong Mufeng, they had already hardened their hearts. They would rather die here than to kill Fairy Hongxia and the rest on the airship. However, compared to Xiao Hua's bloodshot eyes, Fairy Hongxia and the rest on the airship were abnormally calm. Especially Fairy Hongxia. Her eyes stared straight at Xiao Hua. She saw her lover covered in heavenly lightning, his feet stepping on lightning bolts. Her gaze saw her lover's might, and even more so, she saw her lover's true love. In an instant, all of her fear, and even the murderous sword light in front of her disappeared. She only wanted to look at her lover to her heart's content, and imprint him deeply in her heart. When she had the chance in her next life, she would pick him out from the masses and be intimate with him, for the rest of her life. Meng! How could Xiao Hua not see through Fairy Hongxia's gaze? His heart ached as he could not help but cry out. However, the strange thing was, this name was not Fairy Hongxia, but Meng. Aren't you tired? Why don't you stop and rest for a while, and let me tell you a story? Suddenly, a sweet voice rang out from behind Xiao Hua. A pretty girl appeared outside the flashing heavenly lightning. And at the place where the voice fell, the huge swords of the 5 sword cultivators stopped abruptly, as if they were restrained by some powerful force. In fact, the sword light slowly dissipated, and the figures of the 5 sword cultivators were revealed. However, their eyes were filled with joy, and they were all looking at Zhu Xia, who appeared behind Xiao Hua. They were like children who went to bed late, and when they heard their mother's call, they stopped playing and wanted to go into their mother's arms. Rumble tilde in that instant, dozens of bolts of lightning struck down from the sky, completely dispersing the sword light of the 5 people. At the same time, the joy in their eyes was also dispelled, and what replaced it was fear and confusion. However, their fear and confusion did not last long. The Dream Executor and Mountain Splitter came crashing down, piercing the foreheads of Left Jian of the Yin-Yang Sword Sect and Huang Ping of the Lunar Sun Sword Sect respectively. The Spirit Executor Vital Ray came crashing down, decapitating Wang Zhengqiang of the Soaring Wind Sword Sect. The Soaring Dragon shears also flashed with a golden light, cutting Ju Ju of the Thousand Leaves Sword Sect in half. Pu Chengfeng of the Flat Mountain Sword Sect turned pale with fright. Just as he was about to flee, Xiao Hua chased after him for hundreds of meters and smashed his spiked club into a pulp. Looking at Pu Chengfeng's corpse falling from the sky, Xiao Hua let out a long sigh of relief. That heart-wrenching pain gradually relaxed. Turning his head, he saw Fairy Hongxia staring at him with infatuation. Xiao Hua's lips curled into a smile as he flew towards Fairy Hongxia. However, Xiao Hua was still bewildered. Dream. Who is this? Zhu Xia did not fly down, but remained in the air. He looked up at the gradually dissipating dark clouds and the hidden lightning. He then looked at the yin-yang sword gourd beside the flowing cloud airship, and the dream executor and mountain splitter flying swords. Finally, his gaze fell on the soaring dragon shears, and a smile appeared on his face. My feelings. Can I be wrong? I'm not 99% of people. Zhu Xia's heart was filled with pride. Although I don't know how you can help me, but a cultivator with this kind of ability is actually an ordinary person. He will definitely be able to help me. Xiao Hua. You're finally here. Fairy Hong Xia said happily when she saw Xiao Hua fly away. I've made you suffer. Xiao Hua landed on the airship. He originally wanted to hug Fairy Hong Xia, but seeing Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro with their eyes closed, he could only reach out and hold Fairy Hong Xia's soft hands. It's good that you're here. Fairy Hong Xia's eyes were still fixed on Xiao Hua, unwilling to leave for a long time. These 6 people. I've already killed them. Xiao Hua said softly. You don't have to be afraid anymore. With you, I'm not afraid no matter where I am. Good tilde Xiao Hua let go. I'll go see Senior Li. Good tilde Fairy Hong Xia pursed her lips and smiled. But when Xiao Hua turned around, he heard a dong sound. Fairy Hong Xia fell on the airship and fainted. Hong Xia. Xiao Hua was shocked. He understood that the so-called cultivators were all people who trained their minds, and their minds were all tough. Fairy Hong Xia was already a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Her chi was restrained, and her mind was strong. Even if she was seriously injured, it would not be easy for her to faint. Her fainting was definitely not an ordinary injury. Xiao Hua turned around and helped Fairy Hong Xia up. He hugged her weak body and placed 2 fingers of his right hand on her meridians very naturally. In just a moment, Xiao Hua frowned. Fairy Hong Xia's chi and blood were both damaged, and her vitality was greatly damaged. -11. Chapter 2793. Cough cough tilde Li Zongbao forced himself to open his eyes and whispered, Junior sister Hong Xia's Dharma body is injured. It was almost completely destroyed by the 6th sword. Xiao Hua immediately understood. A cultivator's Dharma body was formed from blood essence. Although it could increase one's magical power, if the Dharma body was injured, especially if it was destroyed, it was almost fatal. That was direct damage to one's blood essence. Even if he could save her and wake her up, she could cultivate in the future. Thinking about the elixirs he knew, none of them had such an effect. Even the Wu Xian pill might not be effective. She's your beloved. Not bad sister. A clear voice came from behind Xiao Hua, and Zhu Xia quietly appeared behind him again. Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro looked over when they heard the voice, and they couldn't help but become extremely absent-minded. They only regained their senses after half a cup of tea's time, and their eyes were filled with fear. However, Zhu Xia didn't care about the 2 of them. Instead, she looked at Fairy Hong Xia meaningfully and said, she has a Dharma body. It's the bloodline of a spiritual beast. Millimeter tilde Xiao Hua was worried about Fairy Hong Xia's injuries. He didn't care about Zhu Xia's gaze and only answered indifferently. If the Dharma body is injured or her vitality is damaged, I have a way. Zhu Xia was still confident. I have the confidence to heal her. But, oh, you can really do it. Xiao Hua was overjoyed and said anxiously, as long as you heal her injuries, I will definitely. You don't have to promise anything. Zhu Xia shook her head. You still don't know what you need to help me with. It's too early to promise now. What if you can't help me in the future? Wouldn't it be a waste of words? Also, I have the confidence to heal her, is her Dharma body. As for whether she can cultivate again, this injury will affect her future achievement. I don't know. Unless what? Xiao Hua said anxiously, if you have any difficulties, just tell me. I don't have any difficulties. Zhu Xia smiled, if you know how to refine pills, there won't be any difficulties. Yes, I know how to refine pills. Xiao Hua said without hesitation. Zhu Xia's beautiful eyes looked up and down at Xiao Hua and smiled. What I'm talking about is not a simple refining technique. At the very least. Speaking up to here, Zhu Xia seemed to be gathering his words. Xiao Hua patted his storage bag and took out a medicinal pill, handing it to Zhu Xia. This was refined by this Xiao. Is it acceptable to you? Ayo. Zhu Xia showed a rare look of astonishment, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He took the pill and looked at it, then nodded and said, if this pill was refined by you, of course it's fine. Furthermore, at this point, Zhu Xia's eyes flickered as she smiled and said, moreover, I have a good idea. If you want this sister's cultivation to improve, then please wait a little longer. I will give you a pill formula that will satisfy you. All right. I will listen to your orders. Although Xiao Hua didn't know what Zhu Xia was asking for, he knew that she had helped to save Fairy Hongxia and the other two. He already owed her enough. She shouldn't be coveting him and the others. Of course, if he could save Fairy Hongxia, Xiao Hua would be more than happy to do so even if he had to put himself in danger. Hihi, you can go now. Zhu Xia stretched out her hand and said, give sister to me. I will check on her. You go and save those two stinky men. This man with a green face, his meridians are badly damaged. He used a magic treasure that exceeded his cultivation, and this man has also exhausted his vital essence. This is the result of using the flying boat. If we don't treat them quickly, it will affect their future cultivation. Hearing this, what else could Xiao Hua say? He obediently handed Fairy Hongxia to Zhu Xia and walked to Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao's side. He first looked at Xiao Mao, checked him, then patted his shoulder and said, Xiao Mao, it's been hard on you. It's nothing, big brother. You should take a look at Senior Li first. He waved the immortal slaying whip twice to block the illusory sword. Otherwise, we would have been dead, Xiao Mao said hurriedly. His cultivation was the weakest among the three, and he suffered the least damage. Millimeter, I know. Xiao Hua sighed and took out a pile of medicinal pills and placed them in front of Xiao Mao, allowing him to take them himself. He then walked to Li Zongbao. Senior brother. At this time, Xiao Hua no longer called Li Zongbao senior brother Li and said in a low voice, thank you, senior brother. Millimeter, no need to thank me. Even without you, I would still do it. Li Zongbao glanced at Xiao Hua without hesitation and stopped him from thanking him. Hihi, I know. Xiao Hua nodded, but no matter what, I still have to thank you. Give me your hand. Why? Li Zongbao was puzzled. Senior brother, don't worry about it. Xiao Hua did not explain. Cultivators had never been close to each other. Xiao Hua patted Xiao Mao's shoulder just now because he considered himself to be Xiao Mao's big brother. Letting Li Zongbao hand his wrist over to Xiao Hua like this was tantamount to handing his life over to Xiao Hua. However, Xiao Hua also believed that his friendship with Li Zongbao should have reached the point where he could entrust his life to him. Sure enough, although Li Zongbao was puzzled, he still took out his hand and let Xiao Hua place 2 fingers on his pulse. Zhu Xia placed Fairy Hongxia in a corner of the flying boat and also stretched out 2 fingers. However, her 2 fingers were placed between Fairy Hongxia's eyebrows. As for herself, she looked at Xiao Hua's actions with interest. Millimeter tilde Xiao Hua felt Fairy Hongxia's pulse for a moment, nodded slightly and said, Senior brother, you used the immortal slaying whip twice. That magic treasure is very demanding of true essence. Senior brother's magic power is insufficient, but you still forced yourself to use it. Not only are your meridians broken, even your dantian is damaged. Xiao Hua's words were very serious, but his tone was calm. However, Li Zongbao's reaction was even more unexpected. No need to say so much. You should look at Fairy Hongxia first. In the Battle of the Sword Tomb, her Dharma body was injured. Now that her Dharma body was defeated again, her injuries are several times worse than mine. Me. I'm here. You don't have to worry about it. Zhu Xia said coldly, as if disdaining Li Zongbao's distrust. This is Zhu Xia. Only now did Xiao Hua remember to end Zhu Xia and said, little brother got lost in Huan country. Thanks to her guidance, I came to Sword Peak. Otherwise, even if I didn't run to Flowing Cloud Lake, I definitely wouldn't be able to see you guys in a short period of time. Ah, you came to Sword Peak specially? Li Zongbao was shocked. Seeing Li Zhongbao's shocked expression, Zhu Xia was very satisfied. She snorted coldly and no longer paid attention to Li Zhongbao. Millimeter. Xiao Hua gave Li Zhongbao a meaningful glance and said, Zhu Xia is an extremely smart woman. She seems to be a strange person. Little brother also met her by chance. As for the details, little brother will slowly tell you in the future. You may know a person for a long time without understanding their heart. Li Zhongbao said earnestly. I only know that if you don't hurry and treat her, not to mention cultivation, even your life won't last long. Zhu Xia said with disdain, at this time, you still want to guard against others and yourself. Aren't you tired? Tilda big brother, don't talk anymore. Xiao Hua clapped his hand and took out a spirit pill and said, this is the heaven-mending pill that little brother refined. There aren't many of them and I didn't give it to big brother. Hongxia also doesn't have it. What's the use of this spirit pill? Heaven-mending pill? You actually know how to refine heaven-mending pill? Li Zhongbao was stunned and had a feeling of disbelief. Big brother still doesn't know? Other than giving birth, little brother knows how to do everything. Without a reason, I wouldn't refine this heaven-mending pill, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Puchi tilde Zhu Xia in the distance laughed. This laughter was like a silver bell and that smile was like the bright and beautiful spring. Li Zhongbao and Xiao Maro were both dumbfounded. Seeing the two of them in a daze, Zhu Xia was slightly proud. She rolled her eyes at the two of them and ignored them. Seeing Xiao Maro so absent-minded, Xiao Hua still had some understanding. However, Li Zhongbao was also the same. Xiao Hua just didn't understand. It seemed that Zhu Xia had said before that if one already had a cultivation companion in one's heart or if one's love was deep, then one wouldn't be absent-minded. Could it be that Li Zhongbao didn't have Xiai Zhuoxia in his heart? No. Suddenly, a trace of understanding flashed through Xiao Hua's mind. It's not that senior brother Li's willpower is insufficient, and it's also not that my willpower is greater than senior brother Li's. This was done deliberately by Zhu Xia. She is really powerful. She might really want my help, so she deliberately didn't leave a bad impression in front of me. Even when she showed her magical power in front of me, she didn't overdo it. This way, not only did she not make a fool of me, but she also made me feel proud. Just now, she made the 5 illusory swordsmen stop with just one sentence. What kind of cultivation do I have? How can I not be affected by her? Moreover, she didn't ask me to help her with anything, but she has always been kind to me. When it's time to help, can I refuse? Besides, she saved Hongxia Fairy, Xiao Maro, and senior brother Li's lives. Can I not help her? To be enemies with such a smart woman, it's really too dangerous. Xiao Hua rejoiced as he thought. However, fortunately, the situation seems to be very advantageous to this Xiao. This woman can casually kill the illusory swordsman. Although she strangely appeared in the Huan country, didn't we also go deep into the Huan country to train? Didn't she say before? She specially came to Huan country to look for someone. I'm afraid that only my Dao sect has such a miraculous divination technique. She didn't tell me her background, so she must be a proud disciple of some master in the Cultivation 3 countries. Looking at this situation, it's more likely that we'll be friends and not enemies in the future. Junior brother Xiao, earlier, what kind of elixir did you give Xiao Mao? Li Zhongbao regained his senses and saw that Xiao Hua was also somewhat absent-minded. He asked in a low voice, that elixir's healing effect is very good. If it wasn't for the fact that it can't be compared to the legendary heaven-mending pill, I would almost think that it was the heaven-mending pill. -11. Chapter 2794. Xiao Hua also came back to his senses and said in surprise, I gave Xiao Mao a lot of medicinal pills. Which one is senior brother talking about? It's the kind that is ugly and doesn't have any fragrance. It's used to heal injuries. Xiao Mao said, in the Sword Tomb array, senior brother Li was injured, and many of the elders in the meeting hall were also exhausted. Senior sister gave it to senior brother Li to take. In the end, Senior brother Li took all the medicinal pills given by big brother and gave them to the gold core elders. With that, Xiao Maro hurriedly flipped through the medicinal pills that Xiao Hua just gave him. He took out a medicinal pill and handed it to Xiao Hua, saying, "Here, big brother, this is it." "Oh, this." Xiao Hua glanced at it and said disapprovingly, "This is the Luo Shu pill. I refined it when I was practicing that day. It's a medicinal pill that nourishes the meridians and promotes true essence. There is also the dripping rain pill that was refined together with this blue sea pill. These two pills are about the same. I gave Xiao Maro and Hong Xia these two pills. Senior martial brother is referring to one of these two pills. This is the Luo Shu pill, and the Shilin pill." Li Zongbao looked at Xiao Hua in disbelief. He stretched out his hand and took the medicinal pill from Xiao Hua's hand. He looked at it carefully again. Sure enough, this was the medicinal pill that he took during the sword tomb battle. This thing was similar to the heaven-mending pill in his hand, but after looking at it carefully, it was still different. "Indeed." Xiao Hua nodded slightly. "It's refined with common spiritual herbs like siming fruit. Because those spiritual herbs are cheap and not worth many spirit stones, I used it to practice. Have you seen the real Luo Shu pill and Shilin pill?" Li Zongbao's mood was a little agitated, and he looked straight at Xiao Hua and asked. Xiao Hua knew what Li Zongbao was talking about. He shook his head and said, "I don't have any spirit stones. Naturally, I won't spend a lot of money to buy those Luo Shu pills and Shilin pills. However, I know that the ones refined by others are not the same as the ones refined by me. Of course, I don't know why they are different. If senior brother asks too many questions, little brother doesn't know how to answer." Xiao Hua immediately sealed Li Zongbao's mouth. "Sigh." Li Zongbao threw the pill to Xiao Maro and sighed, "Whether it is the Luo Shu pill or the Shilin pill, I have seen them before and have consumed them. However, junior brother Xiao's void-slaying pill was truly different from theirs. That day, I thought it was some kind of miracle medicine, and even showed off in front of Master and the various core formation masters. But I didn't expect that it was actually such an ordinary medicinal pill." Hearing this, Xiao Hua's heart tightened and he raised his head to look at Xiao Mao. Xiao Mao was also stunned for a moment before coming to his senses. He slightly shrugged his shoulders, put the medicinal pill into his mouth, and closed his eyes to cultivate. "Xiao Hua, you don't blame me. The situation on that day was that when the nest was overturned, no egg would remain intact. If even the core formation masters fall, then the foundation establishment and aura refining disciples will definitely not be able to survive." As soon as he saw Xiao Hua raise his eyebrows, Li Zongbao understood Xiao Hua's vigilance and immediately explained via voice transmission, "Actually, junior brother, with your cultivation and battle achievements, you are the #1 person in the Sword Dao Great War. Even if you have some difficulties, in the entire Dawn Rain continent, who dares to touch you? Not to mention that I and the others won't agree, even your Thunder Control sect. Can all the sects that are participating in the Sword Dao Great War agree? You also don't have to hide anything." Xiao Hua knew that this was Li Zongbao's good intentions, but he understood in his heart that how could he know about his own secrets and his enemies? Therefore, he also transmitted his voice, "These are all my secrets. I know what I'm doing." But Li Zongbao shook his head again. "There is no such thing as an airtight wall in this world. The current you can't hide anymore. I don't dare to say that there are people who know about it now, but I dare to say that in less than 5 years after the Dao Sword Great War, your actions, your heroic deeds, your fame, will definitely spread throughout the entire Dawn Rain continent." Xiao Hua sighed. It was indeed so. Although he disguised himself as nameless and temporarily hid from the Dao sect and the sword cultivators, this trip to Huan country had already completely exposed his strength. Even if he didn't follow Fairy Hong Xia to Huan country, from Xue Mingcha's tone, there were already people among the sword cultivators who knew that he was nameless. One must know that Nameless' reputation was now 100 times more resounding than the terrifying Phoenix. If the name of the terrifying Phoenix was known, then so be it. But if the identity of John Doe was known, His strength was comparable to that of a Yuaniing realm cultivator. He already had a certain status on the Dawn Rain continent. How could the powerful person who sealed her not have heard of her name? Furthermore, he didn't even know that it was the 3 nascent soul cultivators from Xuanyan School and Chiqiao sect who killed Shang Huaming. How could they not know? Which one of these cultivators hadn't lived for thousands of years? Which one of them was scheming and astute? How could they not investigate his background and origin? When that time came, how could he still hide? Not to mention taking revenge for Xiao Yuhong and Gong Mingwei, even he would find it difficult to protect himself. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have participated in that Sword Dao Great War. Xiao Hua was somewhat regretful, but then he smiled bitterly. If he hadn't participated in the Sword Dao Great War, the cultivators of the Dao sect, would the number of people who died be limited to the current number? Not to mention the others, Kui Hongshan and the others would have died long ago. Junior brother, if you still have any hesitation, you might as well. Li Zongbao pondered for a moment, and still transmitted his voice. I have the special pardon order of the sect leader of the Utopia sect. I can plead with Reverend He Ping of the Utopia sect for you. Haha, thank you, senior brother. Xiao Hua patted his chest and said, don't I also have the special pardon order of the Imperial Thunder sect? If you need anything, I can ask the sect leader of the Imperial Thunder sect for help. Alright. Li Zongbao knew that Xiao Hua wasn't willing to explain clearly to him, and he couldn't force him. He nodded slightly, looked up at the millions of Meng mountains, and said in a low voice, actually, sometimes, I still miss the past. Unfortunately, this expression only stayed on his face for a moment, and then slowly disappeared. You'd better take the heavenly pill quickly, Zhu Xia said coldly from afar. If you delay any longer, you'll miss the past even more in the future. Li Zongbao glanced at Zhu Xia indifferently, sat down cross-legged, looked at the heavenly pill, opened it, and swallowed it, and began to regulate his breathing. Xiao Hua, come here for a moment, Zhu Xia said. Alright. Xiao Hua agreed, and released his divine sense. He looked around, and then walked towards Zhu Xia. However, when he passed by Xiao Mao, he didn't forget to say, Xiao Mao, when you're done regulating your breathing, put away the 6 illusory swords just now. Then, without waiting for Xiao Mao's agreement, he walked quickly to Zhu Xia's side, squatted down, looked at Hongxia Fairy, and asked in a low voice, what plan do you have? Well, I've roughly looked at it, and I've also made some calculations, Zhu Xia said bluntly, as if she was an old acquaintance of Xiao Hua. Sister's primordial qi has been greatly damaged, and her bloodline has been destroyed, which is indeed very serious. Originally, I thought that if I could repair her bloodline, her primordial qi would be slowly nourished, and her Dharma body would also be able to recover. However, this method should be inferior, and it's not good for her Dao foundation, and it would be difficult for her Dharma body to achieve great success in the future. Xiao Hua knew that Zhu Xia's thoughts were meticulous, and this was just a prelude, so he didn't reply, and quietly listened to her explanation. Compared to this inferior method, I have 2 other plans, the middle plan and the superior plan, Zhu Xia said again. However, this all depends on your alchemy skills. Let's see what kind of pills you can refine. Oh! Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows, and asked curiously, what do you mean? To tell you the truth, I have a pill formula and a secret technique here. This secret technique is used in conjunction with the pill. This pill is extremely difficult to refine, and it's already not bad for an ordinary alchemist to refine a first-grade pill. Of course, the spiritual herbs and other things in this pill formula can also be reduced, and the pill after the reduction is easy to refine. However, the difference in their effects was like heaven and earth. Moreover, it can't be used in conjunction with the secret technique. Previously, I thought that if you can refine the pill after the reduction, it can be regarded as a middle plan. It should be more beneficial for Sister's cultivation. However, looking at the appearance of your fellow apprentices, the pills you refine are actually not bad, so Sister has another superior plan. Zhu Xia said with a smile, if you can refine a first-grade pill, Sister's Dharma body will be able to be reconstructed, and it will be able to achieve great success in the future. After Zhu Xia finished speaking, Xiao Hua frowned and asked, How many grades of pills are there? Pills are divided into 9 grades, and each grade has different effect. Then, do you have the spiritual herbs and other things to refine the pill? This pill, to be honest, I have always wanted to refine it. Zhu Xia didn't hide it from Xiao Hua, and said, I have collected these spiritual herbs for many years, and most of them are complete, but a small part has never been found. Hearing this, Xiao Hua's heart turned cold, and he said with a bitter smile, You don't even have the spiritual herbs, how can I refine a first-grade pill? You fool. Zhu Xia said with a smile, I am talking about the spiritual herbs to refine a 9th-grade pill. How can that be refined by you? You only need to refine a first-grade pill, and sister will be saved. Xiao Hua's heart shook, and he hurriedly lowered his head, not daring to look at Zhu Xia's smiling face. Although this girl only has a budding face, under her smiling face, there is a hidden beauty hidden in her eyes, and even a little bit of it is unbearable for ordinary people. Zhu Xia looked at Xiao Hua's embarrassed state, and then looked at Fairy Hong Xia who was lying in her arms, and said with a smile, Unfortunately, the situation is urgent, and I don't have any spiritual pills on me, so I can only make this plan in a hurry. Otherwise, based on sister's ability to control the innate primordial water, I can find a better secret technique. Spiritual pills to cultivate the innate primordial water? Xiao Hua asked curiously, What I am going to refine, isn't this the spiritual pill? -11. Chapter 2795. Haha, more or less. Zhu Xia was very patient with Xiao Hua. However, that spirit pill is a bit overbearing. It would be better if you could use a milder pill to nourish your body and replenish your blood and qi. Replenish your blood and qi? Xiao Hua's eyes turned slightly as he probed, then is the parasol pill completed? Parasol pill? What kind of spirit pill is that? Zhu Xia was stunned. Xiao Hua blinked and smiled. It's the blood and qi replenishing medicine commonly used by the Taoist sect. Oh. Zhu Xia nodded. That kind of low-level spirit pill naturally won't work. All right. Xiao Hua nodded. If Zhu Xia wasn't beside him, he would definitely take out the parasol pill for Fairy Hong Xia to consume. However, since he didn't know how to repair his Dharma body and Zhu Xia knew, he naturally couldn't blindly command her. Did you also refine it? At this moment, Zhu Xia smiled and said, Take it out and let me see. It's also good to know your alchemy skills. Yes. Xiao Hua touched his hand and took out the earliest parasol pill he refined. This pill was refined under Xiao Honghua's supervision. If it wasn't a critical moment, he definitely wouldn't be willing to take it out. Looking at the parasol pill in Xiao Hua's hand, shock appeared on Zhu Xia's face. She whispered, The medicinal fragrance is restrained, and the pill veins are faintly discernible. You can actually refine a first-grade spirit pill? Is this a first-grade spirit pill? Xiao Hua was a little puzzled. He had never heard of a 9th-grade spirit pill before. Zhu Xia obviously didn't pay attention to the conversation between Xiao Hua and Li Zongbao, so she naturally didn't look at the sky-mending pill in Li Zongbao's hand. At this moment, she stretched out her hand and said, Let me see this parasol pill. Xiao Hua handed the parasol pill to Zhu Xia. She held it in her hand and looked at it over and over again. Then, a 5-colored light flashed in her eyes. This light disappeared in a flash, and then Zhu Xia's face was really filled with shock. Let me see the spirit pill you gave your senior brother just now. Zhu Xia stretched out her hand and said again. Oh, what's wrong? Xiao Hua didn't understand, but he still took out a spirit pill. Similarly, Zhu Xia's eyes shone with an illusory light. However, after that, Zhu Xia's face was filled with confusion. That small face frowned slightly, causing Xiao Hua's heart to ache slightly. Only after a long time did Zhu Xia ask again, Do you still have this parasol pill? Can you give me one? Yes. Xiao Hua took one without hesitation. What a joke. Not to mention one, even if it was 10, Xiao Hua would still give it to him. Many thanks. Zhu Xia looked at the parasol spring pill. It was exactly the same as the previous one. She then carefully kept it in her bosom and sent the parasol spring pill into Fairy Hongxia's mouth. She smiled and said, "Your parasol spring pill is even better than I expected. With this pill, things will be much easier in the future. Let sister rest for a few more days and let me think about it." "All right." Xiao Hua nodded, his heart at ease. He then looked at the other medicinal pill in Juxia's hand and asked curiously, "Just now, did you see anything different about this medicinal pill? Don't you know the medicinal pills that you refined yourself?" Juxia said with a chuckle. "Indeed, I don't know. Please explain." Xiao Hua answered honestly. "This medicinal pill is a top-notch item." Juxia held the medicinal pill in her hand and said with a smile, "Treat it as a first-grade spirit pill. It perfectly combines the spirit herbs and other ingredients used to refine spirit pills. Its effect is 30% greater than that of ordinary medicinal pills. Perhaps yours is even more. However, the parasol spring pill that I gave sister just now, although it was also a first-grade spirit pill, there was actually a strand of star power condensed inside for some reason. This star power is an extraterrestrial object, different from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in Xiaoyu continent. This star power can not only increase the medicinal effect of spirit pills, it can also cause them to mutate. Mutate? Xiao Hua suddenly realized. He immediately thought of the parasol spring pill that the Zhu mother and daughter had taken in Jinghua City. It can break the curse talisman. Kill the taboo. That's the general idea. Zhu Xia's eyes glowed with a strange light. However, there are really too many mutations. I only know a little. But Xiao Hua was puzzled again. These two types of medicinal pills were refined by me personally. It seems that there isn't any special difference. Zhu Xia covered her mouth and laughed. I didn't ask you what the difference was when you refined them. Haha, I really don't know. Even if you asked me, I wouldn't be able to answer. Xiao Hua scratched his head. Then you'd better think carefully, Zhu Xia said. If you can refine another spirit pill that is similar to the parasol spring pill, the benefits to sister. Haha, I won't say more. You know it clearly in your heart. I know. Xiao Hua nodded. This matter involved Fairy Hongxia, so he naturally had to think carefully. In the following days, they spent their time on the airship, unable to find a suitable place to stay. Fortunately, there were no swordsmen here, nor were there any battles between soul cultivators and swordsmen. Xiao Mao's injuries were the lightest, and he would be able to move freely after 3 days. He collected the storage pouches of the 6 swordsmen, and dealt with the corpses as usual. Then, he found a suitable place 100 miles away. After another 3 days, Li Zongbao was finally able to move. Only then did he activate the flowing cloud flying ship and fly to this place. As for Fairy Hongxia, who was the most seriously injured, she still hadn't woken up. However, Xiao Hua believed in his parasol spring pill. Moreover, through taking her pulse, he knew that Fairy Hongxia was steadily recovering. Xiao Maro was looking for a valley at the bottom of 2 mountains. This was rarely seen in Huan country. Xiao Hua and Xiao Maro steered the flying boat to land at the foot of the mountain. Xiao Hua very naturally clapped his hands and took out the capital star array spirit talisman again. Zhu Xia was dumbfounded when he saw Xiao Hua casting out the talismans with great familiarity and the capital star formation slowly taking shape. He exclaimed in disbelief, "Xiao Hua, this is the capital star formation? Oh, you really know everything." Xiao Hua was a little embarrassed. It was as if everything was no longer a secret in Zhu Xia's eyes. He had used talismans countless times to arrange them, but no one had ever discovered them. Before this star array was even arranged, it was seen through by Zhu Xia. "It's the capital star array," Xiao Hua replied. "You really have a lot of knowledge. You even know this. This array, where did you get it?" Zhu Xia asked anxiously. "I made it myself." Xiao Hua also planned to keep it a secret from Zhu Xia, so he blinked. You also know how to make talismans and array talismans?" Zhu Xia was stunned. This answer was clearly out of her expectations. Yes, except for giving birth. After Xiao Hua said it, he felt that it was inappropriate. He lowered his voice and said, I know everything else. Zhu Xia didn't care at all. She said anxiously, then, can you help me make a set? After saying that, Zhu Xia was a little regretful. She said anxiously, forget it, pretend I didn't say anything. This item is so precious. Oh, this is, you want to ask me for help? Xiao Hua asked. Alas, I don't even know what I want to ask you for help. Zhu Xia sighed. From this, maybe it's this array? Or maybe it's not. It's okay tilde this array is yours. Xiao Hua waved his hand. You saved Hongxia, this is my thanks. Hehe, Xiao Hua, you are so nice. Zhu Xia happily jumped on the foothill. Her braids swayed behind her head, looking very cute. This moment of happiness really came from the bottom of her heart. It seemed that she hadn't felt like this for a long time. Her smile was as brilliant as a mountain flower and as graceful as the bright moonlight. The slyness and intelligence on her face had long been covered by this joy. Hehe, this is how a little sister should be. Xiao Hua was also happy to see this. That. Xiao Maro was unhappy. He twisted his fingers and said, Big brother, this, you don't have to be so obvious. You have so many good things, why didn't you take them out earlier? Why didn't I take them out earlier? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes at him and said, you have eyes but can't see. Fine, I won't argue with you. Xiao Maro said with a smile, you gave them to this one, you might as well give one to me. Cough cough tilde Li Zongbao, who was originally cultivating with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. Although he was only coughing, his eyes were very obvious. From the looks of it, Li Zongbao had already learned a lesson from his experience with medicinal pills. As long as there was something good, then, it was better to open his mouth first. This is a spiritual talisman, Xiao Hua said with a little exasperation, without spiritual beast fur and blood, where do you want me to refine it for you? Spiritual talisman tilde Xiao Maro said with surprise, so Big Brother also knows how to refine spiritual talismans. This is the first time I've heard of it. Not bad. Li Zongbao's meridians were damaged, and his mental cultivation method seemed to have some flaws. Seeing that the two of them were only praising him and not refining the materials, Xiao Hua could only bitterly smile. I have some spiritual beast fur here, I don't know what you need. Zhu Xia was very obedient. She stretched out her hand and took out a storage bag. You don't need it. Xiao Hua said with a smile, you should quickly take a look at what Hongxia needs. I have already prepared this. Zhu Xia was not polite. She took out a jade slip and handed it to Xiao Hua, saying, according to what I discussed with you before, this is the pill formula of the flying shadow pill. Moreover, I also listed the spiritual herbs, spiritual blood and other things needed to refine the flying shadow pill from the 1st grade to the 6th grade. As long as I have it, I will mark it. You, do as you see fit. Presumably, you are an alchemist, so you should have some things in your storage bag. Hearing this, Xiao Hua was overjoyed. He didn't expect Zhu Xia to be so well prepared and so considerate. She was really meticulous. After taking the jade slip and probing it with his divine sense, Xiao Hua was even more surprised. Inside was the pill formula of the flying shadow pill, but Xiao Hua had never seen such a detailed pill formula in his life. -11. Chapter 2796. This pill formula was divided into 6 grades. The main ingredients of each grade were similar, but the age of the main ingredients and the amount of each main ingredient were different. However, when it came to the supplementary ingredients, the differences were huge. The most important thing was that Zhu Xia had written down the reasons for these differences very clearly. Rather than saying that this was a flying shadow pill formula, it was better to say that this was a simple pill formula analysis technique. Many thanks tilde Xiao Hua raised his head and said in a low voice. He tilde Zhu Xia pursed her lips and said, don't thank me, this is all ready-made. I just showed it to you. Moreover, this pill formula doesn't have a refining method, so it's useless for others to have it. Of course, you can use this pill formula, But you can't leak it out. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Ian, I know what I'm doing. Xiao Hua naturally knew the importance of this pill formula. It was probably a secret technique of Zhu Xia's sect. It was already good that he could refine this flying shadow pill, so how could he dare to leak it out? I believe you. Zhu Xia nodded and took out a storage bag. This is the material I collected in my early years. Take it. Don't. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand and said, I'd better take a look first. There are many things in this pill formula that I've never seen before. I still need to ask you for advice. All right. Zhu Xia tilted her head and thought for a moment, then said, what you know is what you know, what you don't know is what you don't know. Xiao Hua, with your cultivation method, you'll definitely go very far. After that, Xiao Hua activated the capital star array and casually wrote down the method of setting up the capital star array on 3 jade slips. He threw 2 of them to Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro to shut their mouths, and handed the last one to Zhu Xia. Thus, the 4 of them each stayed in one place and started to comprehend the jade slips. The Flying Shadow Pill's pill formula was extremely detailed, but it was also strange because there was spirit blood inside the pill formula. Zhu Xia had already said that it contained spiritual blood before he got the pill formula. However, Xiao Hua didn't care. He even thought that he had misheard. When he had first obtained the jade slip, he had used his divine will to look at the spirit plants, as well as their names and shapes. Some of the spirit plants had different names, but based on their shapes, he could tell that they existed in the space. As for the spirit blood, he had ignored it. When he started looking at the first grade flying shadow pill, he realized that there was a type of spirit blood in each grade after the main ingredient, and each spirit blood had a different name. Damn it! Xiao Hua suddenly realized something. This flying shadow pill. I'm afraid it uses spiritual blood as a catalyst to stimulate the cultivator's bloodline and create a Dharma body. This is the secret technique that the cultivation aristocratic families really want. Zhu Xia Xiao Hua opened his eyes and asked in a low voice, the spirit blood inside this flying shadow pill can only be used after it has been refined? Of course. Zhu Xia nodded matter-of-factly. How can spirit blood be used if it isn't refined? You're an alchemist yourself, there's no reason you don't know, right? But then, Zhu Xia suddenly froze and said with some realization, could it be, you don't know how to refine spirit blood? Xiao Hua bitterly smiled. He knew how to refine spirit blood, but he didn't know that there was also refining spirit blood in alchemy. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua said, I know how to refine spirit blood, but I don't know if it's the same as what you're talking about. Zhu Xia shook his head. I only know how to refine spirit blood, I don't know the specifics. All right. Xiao Hua was helpless and could only try his best. Since it was refining spirit blood, the demon realm's blood refining technique should be useful. Half a day later, Xiao Hua and Zhu Xia didn't stay idle and finally thoroughly understood the Flying Shadow Pill's pill formula. Normally, Xiao Hua's alchemy skills were already very good, and he knew all the spirit plants like the back of his hand. However, the spirit plants in this pill formula were different from the ones he knew, so he had to ask them one by one. There were even some spirit plants that Xiao Hua didn't have and Zhu Xia didn't collect. According to the pill formula, Xiao Hua found similar spirit plants in his space and discussed the effects of these spirit plants with Zhu Xia. Zhu Xia didn't know much about spirit blood, but he had some knowledge about spirit plants. After discussing with Xiao Hua, they complemented each other. After half a day, not only did Xiao Hua have a thorough understanding of the pill formula, he also had a new understanding of the planting and refining of some spirit plants. You're really old and learn. Xiao Hua sighed, as if Zhu Xia's words had opened a new door to alchemy for him. The cultivation foundation of this dawn rain continent is really unfathomable. Another half a day later, Xiao Hua brought back the spirit herbs and spirit blood that Zhu Xia had collected. He compared them with the pill recipe and the spirit herbs in his space. He sorted out the materials needed to refine the flying shadow pill and returned the bag of holding to Zhu Xia. Zhu Xia looked at the spiritual herbs that had barely been touched and the spiritual blood that had been taken away. Her heart was filled with astonishment. However, her face remained calm and she did not say anything. It was as if everything was within her calculations. After putting away the storage pouch, Zhu Xia asked, "Are you ready? Are you going to refine pills on the flying boat? Have you found the reason for the difference in the pills?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. In these past few days, when he was looking at the pill formula, he was also thinking about the difference between the earliest parasol pill and the later pills. He was even thinking about the difference between the rejuvenation pill and the ageless pill. The rejuvenation pill and the ageless pill could be understood. After all, one was refined with the power of heavenly thunder and the other was refined with ordinary method. The power of heavenly thunder was the reason why the rejuvenation pill could bring back the spring. However, Xiao Hua couldn't understand the reason why the parasol pill was unique. It seemed there wasn't any difference. It wasn't until the end that Xiao Hua recalled the details of his alchemy that he finally had an idea. When he was refining the parasol pill, he was guarding the side of the pill furnace. But when he was refining other pills, he wasn't completely guarding the side of the pill furnace. He even left the cave to go to other places. Maybe it's because my character is good and I can refine pills by guarding beside the pill furnace. Xiao Hua could only wipe his face like this. Now that Zhu Xia asked, he naturally couldn't say the reason. He only looked around and said, "Naturally, I can't refine pills on the flying boat. It's too noisy and will delay your cultivation. I'd better find a cave. As for the difference, I have some ideas. I can only give it a try. You take a drop of spirit blood for every pill. Are you planning to refine one pill for every pill?" Zhu Xia asked tentatively. "Can you only refine one pill at a time?" Xiao Hua asked back. "Oh, you can refine 2 pills?" Zhu Xia was slightly puzzled. "Oh, I understand. Your pill formula has the weight of 1 flying shadow pill." Xiao Hua suddenly understood. "That's right." Zhu Xia nodded. "If you can refine 2 flying shadow pills at a time, the sun will rise from the west. Ha ha ha, if you use 2 drops of spirit blood, you can naturally do it." Xiao Hua laughed. "I can only use 1 drop of spirit blood." Zhu Xia nodded seriously. "Can you refine 2 drops of spirit blood at a time?" This. Xiao Hua was astonished. He had refined 9 drops of spirit blood at a time, but he didn't know if his refining method was the same as what Zhu Xia said. "Try refining the first-grade flying shadow pill first." Zhu Xia laughed. "If you fail, it doesn't matter. Sister can also use the ungraded flying shadow pill." Xiao Hua knew that the ungraded flying shadow pill was a pill that didn't require spirit blood. It could only help Fairy Hong Xia recover and repair her Dharma body. It couldn't achieve the effect of breaking and rebuilding. "For Hong Xia, I will also refine the first-grade flying shadow pill." Xiao Hua looked at the still unconscious Fairy Hong Xia and said firmly. In fact, when Xiao Hua took the Wu Xian pill, he wanted to wake Fairy Hong Xia up. However, Zhu Xia insisted that he couldn't wake her up after using the pill. The longer she was unconscious, the better it was for the Dharma body's recovery. Xiao Hua didn't quite understand the meaning of this, but he still listened to Zhu Xia's arrangement. "I believe you." Zhu Xia nodded with a smile, as if she had returned to being the girl who had everything under control. In the valley, there were still small caves. Xiao Hua found one a little further away. When he entered, he clapped his hands and took out several puppets. Looking at the puppets gradually enlarging the cave, Xiao Hua casually waved his hands and prepared to take out the 3-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace, but at this moment, Xiao Hua suddenly froze. Cold sweat seeped out of his back. He looked at the puppets in front of him and shuddered. What's wrong with me?" Xiao Hua couldn't help but ask himself, this Zhu Xia, with such a remarkable ability and a mysterious origin, I should be extremely wary of her. We've only been friends for 10 days, and I actually revealed so many of my secrets to her. Even eldest senior brother and master don't know these things. How can I trust her so much? How can I tell her everything I know without holding anything back? That's right, ever since he met Zhu Xia, Xiao Hua had been somewhat wary at the beginning. But gradually, this wariness disappeared. Not to mention Zhu Xia's beauty, Even Zhu Xia's cuteness was deeply imprinted in Xiao Hua's heart. He only treated Zhu Xia as someone he trusted. Not to mention Xiao Hua's lightning escape technique, even dream execution, mountain splitting, spirit execution origin light, and soaring dragon scissors were all revealed to Zhu Xia. There was also the art of alchemy, the art of talisman creation. Zhu Xia saw through it all. Even the talisman of the heavenly star array, Xiao Hua agreed without hesitation the moment Zhu Xia asked for it. This was even more inconceivable for the stingy Xiao Hua. Now, Xiao Hua actually wanted to refine the flying shadow pill in front of Zhu Xia and took out the puppet. Everything seemed to be out of Xiao Hua's control, as if Zhu Xia had unknowingly taken control of it. What if Zhu Xia wanted to observe Xiao Hua's alchemy later? Would Xiao Hua agree or disagree? -11. Chapter 2797. What scared Xiao Hua the most was that Zhu Xia had let nature take its course. Everything was untraceable, and Xiao Hua could not help but do it. It was true that Xiao Hua had intended to reveal some of his cultivation, but he had never thought of revealing everything about himself. How could Xiao Hua explain the several tens of thousands of years of medicinal age of the spiritual herbs used in alchemy? However, when Xiao Hua left Zhu Xia's side, he came to a realization. However, when Xiao Hua thought about it, it seemed that everything did not allow him to have any doubts. When Xiao Hua first met Zhu Xia only asked for his help. She did not mention any rewards or conditions. Then, Zhu Xia said that he had to come to Sword Peak. Otherwise, Fairy Hong Xia would lose her life. Although he was a little doubtful, he still came. When he met Fairy Hong Xia and the rest in danger, although he did not show it, he already trusted Zhu Xia in his heart. After that, Zhu Xia's words saved Fairy Hong Xia's life and death. However, Zhu Xia didn't even say a word of thanks. He even told Xiao Hua very clearly that this had nothing to do with asking for his help. This was truly a righteous man. It made Xiao Hua trust Zhu Xia again. After that, Zhu Xia took out the flying shadow pill formula that she had collected and came up with the best, middle, and worst plans to save Fairy Hong Xia. This made Xiao Hua shed tears of gratitude, and he had already let his guard down. However, when he thought about it again, while saving Fairy Hong Xia, Zhu Xia was also making use of Xiao Hua to refine pills. In this world, there has never been a lack of smart people, but to be so smart, to let someone be sold and help her count the spiritual stones, and even bargain for her, how many are there? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. This does not seem to be smart. If it is the power of charm, or the art of seduction, that is the real deal. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua secretly released his Buddhist awareness. Sure enough, Zhu Xia sat beside Fairy Hong Xia, guarding her. It was fine to say that she cared about Fairy Hong Xia, or that she wanted to kidnap Fairy Hong Xia, but she did not notice that Xiao Hua was opening up a cave. She always did the most appropriate thing at the most appropriate time, and would not let others have too much suspicion. A cultivator who can kill 5 third-grade illusory sword cultivators with one sentence actually called a late-stage foundation establishment female cultivator sister. Isn't this a bit too much? Xiao Hua thought of how Zhu Xia called Fairy Hong Xia sister. Previously, it was extremely intimate, but now he felt that it was too strange. But I am just Xiao Hua. Even if I am nameless, what is worthy of Zhu Xia's desire? Xiao Hua really couldn't figure it out. With some inexplicable apprehension and caution, Xiao Hua activated the puppets a little more. Soon, he hastily opened up a cave. Taking advantage of the fact that Zhu Xia wasn't paying attention, he hurriedly put away the puppets. However, just as Xiao Hua took out the pill furnace and was about to preheat it, Zhu Xia came. Xiao Hua, can I see how you refine pills? Zhu Xia's smile was very beautiful, like a little sister talking to her brother calmly. Xiao Hua hesitated, not daring to look at Zhu Xia's face. He lowered his head and said, "This Xiao has already thought about it." One of the differences between refining pills is that when Xiao Maro first refined the parasol pill, this Xiao refined it alone, and there was no one watching. Oh? So that's the case, then I can only not watch. Zhu Xia did not have the slightest bit of awkwardness or displeasure. Her voice was still very pleasant to hear. I still want to see how this first-grade pill is refined. Hihi, wait until this Xiao refines it, then you can see. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Okay, you refine it yourself. Zhu Xia skipped out again. When she reached the entrance of the cave, she laughed and said, "Leave big sister to me. I will also tidy up that secret technique and give it to you in a while." That secret technique also targets 6th grade pills, so it is a bit different. You and sister are the closest, so you have to help her. This Zhu Xia. Should I trust her? Or should I not? Xiao Hua only dared to raise his head at this time, looking at Zhu Xia's graceful back, and thought with some worry. At this time, although Xiao Hua was a little confused and even worried about Fairy Hongxia, his alchemy skills had reached the point of perfection, so refining the flying shadow pill was not difficult at all. He threw in the spiritual herbs one by one, and when the spiritual herbs turned into juice in the furnace, he waved a spell to quench the impurities inside. As the green smoke was produced in the furnace, wisps of medicinal fragrance rushed to his face, and Xiao Hua's heart gradually calmed down again. After all, Zhu Xia looked like a budding girl, but her magical powers were unfathomable. Xiao Hua was definitely not her opponent. Why would someone like her, who could easily kill him, want to scheme against him? Instead of being on tenterhooks, it was better to face her calmly. Perhaps, everything was just Xiao Hua's own guess. Of course, even if she coveted the flying shadow pill, he would help her refine it and get the pill formula. Why not? In addition to being extra careful, Xiao Hua was really at his wits' end. Spells were cast one after another, and the Samadhi True Fire was like a dragon surging outside the 3-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace. This kind of fire control method was simply beyond the reach of ordinary alchemist. Even seeing that the pill furnace was fine for the time being, Xiao Hua even diverted a bit of attention to refine the jade talisman. In fact, as early as when Xiao Hua was refining the fire talisman, he wanted to refine the talisman of the capital star array into a jade talisman. Unfortunately, this guy never had time to do what he wanted to do, so he had been delaying it. Until now, when refining the flying shadow pill, he had leisure. After all of the medicinal liquids had been refined, Xiao Hua began to fuse the pills according to his previous understanding of the flying shadow pill's pill formula. Generally speaking, fusing pills was the key to refining pills. The amount, order, and timing of each medicinal liquid were all related to whether or not the pill could be formed. The true pill formula contained the essence of the pill refining method. Without these specific methods, the possibility of refining a pill was next to none. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's alchemy skills had always been self-taught. After the spiritual herbs of the flying shadow pill were replaced by him, he was even more confident. After a few days, he managed to fuse dozens of medicinal liquids into a fist-sized pill liquid. At this time, Xiao Hua understood that the part he was familiar with had been completed. The next step was to refine the spiritual blood. Xiao Hua secretly released a strand of Buddhist consciousness and looked at Zhu Xia. Zhu Xia was still sitting next to Red Dawn Fairy, and there was no change. On the contrary, Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro looked at the cave impatiently, as if they were worried about him not coming out. Especially Xiao Maro, who was sniffing from time to time, as if he was inhaling the medicinal fragrance. Red Dawn, why hasn't she woken up yet? After so long, Xiao Hua was puzzled again. Even if she was seriously injured, she should have woken up by now after taking the parasol pill. Could it be that this was done by Zhu Xia? If I don't refine the flying shadow pill, Red Dawn won't be able to wake up. Withdrawing his Buddhist consciousness, Xiao Hua helplessly released the spiritual fire to refine the drop of spiritual blood known as the Swift Sparrow. Xiao Hua had already helped Li Zongbao refine his essence blood, so controlling the refining of this spiritual blood was not a difficult task. However, what shocked Xiao Hua the most was that as the spirit fire tempered the spirit blood, a 3-foot-tall shadow gradually appeared within the rain-like spirit blood. The formation of this shadow was 10 times more difficult than the formation of the shadow within Li Zongbao's spirit blood. Xiao Hua actually refined it for a total of 9 days, and after taking dozens of spiritual power replenishing pills, he finally refined the complete shadow. Lucky. Xiao Hua secretly wiped away his cold sweat. Just the spiritual blood of a first-grade spirit pill is so difficult to refine. No wonder this flying shadow pill. Even Zhu Xia couldn't refine it. Moreover, it's a good thing that I have already refined my essence blood, otherwise, I definitely wouldn't have been able to complete it in 9 days. Furthermore, with my current pill refining skills, I can barely extend the time needed to refine the pill. I'm afraid that this pill will condense before I finish refining the spiritual blood, right? Go tilde Xiao Hua urged the spiritual blood, and the shadow of the swift sparrow was about to enter the pill furnace. Quick tilde an indescribable cry came out from the shadow. The blood shadow of the swift sparrow that had been completely refined seemed to have gained some intelligence. It knew that the alchemy furnace was its only way out, so it started to struggle and wanted to escape from Xiao Hua's control. The sound of the swift sparrow was extremely loud, and Zhu Xia, Li Zongbao, and Xiao Mao all heard it. Xiao Mao couldn't help but rush to the entrance of the cave, as if he wanted to help. As for Zhu Xia, he didn't even frown, and his body naturally didn't move. He only slightly opened his eyes, and then closed them again. Li Zongbao turned around, looked at Zhu Xia and Fairy Hongxia, and walked over to Xiao Mao's side, and whispered to him. The two of them knew that Xiao Hua was refining pills inside the cave. Although they were worried, they didn't rush in. Seeing that the blood shadow of the swift sparrow was so unruly, Xiao Hua wasn't alarmed, and was instead happy. This level of spiritual blood was the real spiritual blood. To deal with this kind of blood shadow, Xiao Hua already had a method. Hundreds of soul strands were released from his law eyes, and tightly bound the blood shadow. Swift. The swift sparrow's shadow struggled a few times, but how could it be a match for Xiao Hua's soul strand? Go tilde Xiao Hua sneered, and urged the soul strands to pull the 3 kai long shadow, and threw it into the pill furnace. Immediately after, several pill refining techniques were sent in, and a formless imprisonment was born from the pill furnace, enveloping the swift sparrow's blood shadow, and forcefully dragging it into the pill liquid. Good tilde seeing that the pill refining techniques were also effective against the blood shadow, Xiao Hua was overjoyed. Immediately after, he sent the pill refining techniques into the pill furnace, and the magic power formed ripples that converged into the pill liquid, firmly imprisoning the swift sparrow's blood shadow inside. -11. Chapter 2798. Not only that, the blood shadow of the swift sparrow struggled a few times in the pill elixir and gradually merged with the pill elixir. So that's how it is tilde Xiao Hua's divine sense never left the pill furnace and even stayed near the pill elixir. He could clearly see that among the dozens of spirit herbs of the flying shadow pill, other than the sovereign, minister, and 5 elements, there was also the ability to melt and confine the spirit blood shadow. The different pill elixirs formed thin threads that tightly wrapped around the blood shadow and slowly seeped in. The art of alchemy is also limitless. Xiao Hua sighed inwardly. Big brother. Xiao Mao's voice came several times. No matter. Xiao Hua finally had the time to say, I'm very normal here. In a few days, I'll be able to form the pill. Good. Xiao Mao and the others heard and then nodded. On the contrary, Zhu Xia's indifferent face revealed some astonishment. The fusion of the flying shadow pill didn't need to be said. Because of the addition of the spirit blood, the time needed was also extended. In the end, it took a total of 49 days for the pill to be formed. When Xiao Hua finally sent the pill forming technique into the phoenix-patterned 3-legged vermilion bird furnace, a clear sound rang out. The top of the phoenix pattern cauldron opened by itself. A fist-sized bird flew out of the cauldron and flew out of the cauldron. Good. As expected of the flying shadow pill, Xiao Hua's divine sense clearly saw that the swift sparrow was a shadow. A successful flying shadow pill could actually have a shadow. This was the first time Xiao Hua had seen it, so he definitely didn't expect it before. Fall tilde Xiao Hua waved his sleeve and covered it with the heaven and earth sleeve. Without any suspense, the swift sparrow fell into Xiao Hua's hand. A pill the size of a thumb was spinning in the air. This pill was different from the ones Xiao Hua had refined before. On the outside of the pill, there were fine pill veins that were faintly discernible. These pill veins formed the figure of a swift sparrow, as if it would fly out at any moment. The pill was blood red, and there was a faint layer of blood-red mist inside, protecting the pill. Even Xiao Hua's divine sense couldn't penetrate it. The pill image of this first-grade flying shadow pill was actually so beautiful, completely different from the ugly pill that Xiao Hua had refined earlier. Congratulations, Xiao Hua. Zhu Xia stood at the entrance of the cave with a smile. He didn't step into the cave as he spoke loudly. Hihi, I still have to thank fellow Daoist for the pill formula. Xiao Hua glanced at the pill furnace that was still surrounded by the true Samadhi fire and walked to the entrance of the cave. He placed the flying shadow pill in front of Zhu Xia and said, I wonder if fellow Daoist is interested in this pill? Zhu Xia did not stand on ceremony. He took the flying shadow pill and examined it. Then, he smiled and said, Your alchemy skills are indeed extraordinary. It far exceeds my expectations. This pill should be a first-grade high-grade pill. Then, 5 colors once again appeared in Zhu Xia's eyes. After the brilliance passed, Zhu Xia slightly frowned and said curiously, Xiao Hua, although this flying shadow pill is very high quality, but it conforms to the norm. It is far from the star energy in the Wu Kang pill from before. Ah, is that so? Xiao Hua stared blankly. He couldn't help but scratch his head as his brows wrinkled. Hehe, this is already not bad. Zhu Xia hurriedly smiled and said, This pill can already be consumed. Do you want to continue refining the second-grade flying shadow pill? Or do you want me to wake sister up and consume it? As expected. Xiao Hua thought to himself, Red Cloud's body, it was indeed Zhu Xia's doing. But she just admitted it. This makes me unable to. Do you think it's better to wake her up now? Or wake her up later? Xiao Hua pushed the question to Zhu Xia. Hihi, naturally it's better to wake her up later. Zhu Xia smiled and said, In this way, not only will sister have a better harvest, I will also be able to obtain a first-grade flying shadow pill. Is she really fine? Xiao Hua asked worriedly. Of course. Zhu Xia nodded. Right now, sister is in hibernation. Although she is unconscious, her body is repairing itself. This kind of repair is far more effective than when a person is awake. Moreover, the effect on the body is far-reaching. Or rather, it is more in line with the heavenly Tao. That's right. Xiao Hua secretly nodded. This Zhu Xia is right. Big brother Tilda Xiao Maro and Li Zongbao spoke again after Zhu Xia. It was very obvious that Zhu Xia grasped the timing extremely well. When she should appear, she would definitely appear first. When she shouldn't appear, she would definitely not appear. It's fine. Little brother's spirit pill has already been formed. Xiao Hua looked at the two people's concern and said to Li Zongbao, Red Cloud's injury has the most basic guarantee. Little brother will discuss with Miss Zhu Xia and see if we can take another step. Stop before going too far. Li Zongbao said indifferently and turned his head. After taking 2 steps, another indifferent sentence floated over. Going too far is as bad as not going far enough. If it was someone else, they would naturally think more and perhaps stop here. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua had always pursued perfection. That day when he was condensing his core in the sword tomb, facing the baptism of the 3 gold lightning tribulation, he did not hesitate to take out his primordial spirit that could benefit from the light. Whatever flying sword, whatever small dipper, he gave it all out. To put it bluntly, he was a person who wanted to take advantage of the netherworld even after death. How could he stop? After resting for half a day, Xiao Hua threw the second batch of spirit herbs into the 3-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace one by one. This time, Zhu Xia did not rush him at all. Even the first-grade flying shadow pill, Zhu Xia only appreciated it for a moment before returning it to Xiao Hua. She clearly said that she would definitely not accept the flying shadow pill if she did not have any extra flying shadow pills. Seeing Zhu Xia so upright, Xiao Hua almost doubted his own thought. Looking at the gradually forming liquid pill, Xiao Hua then took out some jade essence and was about to continue refining jade talismans. However, Just as the jade essence melted into liquid, Xiao Hua suddenly froze. How could he know how to refine talismans when he was refining the Wu Kang pill? Other than guarding the pill furnace and meditating, there was nothing else he could do. Furthermore, he had even dozed off in the pill room of Yellow Flower Ridge. Could it be related to meditating? Xiao Hua thought for a moment, then stretched out his hand and put the liquid jade into his space. He looked around himself and really closed his eyes to meditate. Outside the cave, Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro were comprehending the capital star array. Even Zhu Xia wanted this array, so Li Zongbao and the others naturally knew that this array was good stuff. Even though Zhu Xia was sitting beside Fairy Hong Xia with her eyes closed, looking calm on the surface, her heart was filled with an avalanche of emotion. Although Xiao Hua knew how to refine pills, he did not know the difficulty of refining the first-grade flying shadow pill, let alone Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro. But Zhu Xia knew. She had collected so many materials for the flying shadow pill in her storage bag, so why was she still unable to refine the flying shadow pill? The fundamental reason was that she did not trust the alchemists she knew. In other words, as far as she knew, there were not many alchemists who could refine the flying shadow pill. But this Xiao Hua, this cultivator from the Imperial Thunder sect whom she met for the first time, actually refined it so easily. Moreover, it was a first-grade spirit pill. In fact, when she told Xiao Hua about the flying shadow pill, Zhu Xia's original intention was to take out the pill formula for the non-grade flying shadow pill. She did not plan to tell him about the remaining 6th-grade pills. But it was also at that moment, in a flash, she felt that Xiao Hua was the person she was looking for, the person who could help her, who might be able to fulfill her wish. Or perhaps, she was also testing Xiao Hua. If she could not fulfill her wish, how could Xiao Hua help her complete such a difficult task? Although it seemed that Zhu Xia trusted Xiao Hua very much and told him everything, she did not hold back the pill formula for the flying shadow pill and even took out the spirit blood she had painstakingly collected. But in her heart, she really did not have any confidence. She did not have any confidence at all. And it wasn't that she didn't want to see how Xiao Hua refined pills, and it wasn't that she didn't want to peek at Xiao Hua's progress in refining pills, but she knew that at this time, she could only wait. She could only obtain Xiao Hua's trust without arousing his suspicion and complete her important task. That task, she felt that it was almost impossible for her to complete. Just as Zhu Xia's thoughts were running wild, an inexplicable palpitation suddenly appeared in her heart. At the same time, a familiar aura appeared, star power. Zhu Xia almost did not need to open her eyes. That wild, tyrannical, and incomparably pure star power aura seeped into her body through this not far distance. Xiao Hua can really draw the power of the outer realm's origin stars. Zhu Xia's heart was beating wildly. Who exactly is he? Even at this moment, Zhu Xia still didn't dare to pry into Xiao Hua's actions in the cave. Xiao Hua had given her too many surprises, and these surprises didn't seem like they should be counted as surprises. Perhaps, other than this extremely difficult matter in front of me, should also be able to land on him. Zhu Xia slightly opened her eyes and looked at Li Zongbao and Xiao Maro in the distance, who did not know what was going on at all, and thought to herself. At the same time, the 5-colored brilliance in Zhu Xia's eyes appeared again. Outside the cave where Xiao Hua was, a faintly discernible brilliance was like a pillar of light that pierced the sky. It was the endless star power that fell into Xiao Hua's body. Zhu Xia only took a glance and hurriedly closed her eyes. Her eyes returned to their original state. It's a pity. Although Xiao Hua has such a remarkable ability, his cultivation is really too weak. The difficult task in front of me, he might not be able to complete it, let alone my matter. Zhu Xia sighed slightly. I still have to wait. Then, Zhu Xia restrained her thoughts, as if she did not see the starlight at all. She did not dare to spy on what kind of remarkable ability Xiao Hua was using in the cave. But if Zhu Xia really did spy on him, she was afraid, her jaw would drop to the ground. 11. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.